Twists and turns 1. Spring came to Iron Break on warm winds that swiftly began melting away at all the ice and snow. Soon, the green of growing plants once again appeared, and the air became full of the sound of chirping birds that had suddenly returned after their long absence. Their singing made everything seem fresh and full of new energy. Black Nail wasted no time. There was still a lot of melting mountains of snow left on the wet ground, but that didn't mean there wasn't work for his minions to do. At last, winter was coming to an end, and the next phase of his bloody plan for vengeance could begin. The Hobgoblin chieftain had been waiting a long time for the coming of spring. Months. Once the bandits were dealt with, there wasn't much that had needed his direct supervision, and even he could only sleep and whine about the weather so much. Despite Black Nail's fears that the harsh cold of winter would wear his tribe down, Iron Break had prospered instead. The food stores and hunters had provided enough food for everyone important, and despite the snow, the goblins had been able to scrounge up their own food most of the time. They could eat almost anything, including tree bark and the bugs that hibernated in it. There was never a shortage of bark, thanks to the ongoing logging operation. The Trogs had also managed to figure out how to build underground mushroom farms, which were producing some food, although not a lot. Mushroom farming was tricky and they only seemed to like a few caves that had just the right level of heat and humidity. While the living conditions in Iron Break were well below that of most human villages, none of the goblins or hobgoblins complained. 1. They knew Black Nail wouldn't care about their petty problems, and 2. They were used to much worse. A solid roof over their heads and a warm fire were unheard of luxuries to most of them. As Black Nail feasted and napped in his mansion, the thought of how much he'd improved the life of his minions filled him with smug satisfaction. He was the greatest leader ever. His ungrateful minions really should thank him more for everything he'd done for them. After the snow melt, the first order Black Nail gave was for all his hobgoblins to emerge from their lodges, huts, and holes to be counted. He needed to know how many of them there were now. It had been impossible to count them all during winter. He'd tried to send some minions around to do it, but they all lost count after the first few homes. Apparently, everyone needed to be gathered in one spot for it to be done right. Counting and goblins didn't go together well. However, once everyone was assembled in the training yard, a rough estimate of Iron Break's hobgoblin population was quickly reached. It seemed there were now over 700 of them in the settlement. This number took Black Nail by surprise. It was much higher than he'd thought it would be, since he'd sent so many hobgoblins to other camps before winter had set in and others had died in the battle with the bandits. Had some of the hobs from outside snuck back in? No, after talking to his lieutenants, that didn't seem to be the case. All the new hobgoblins were simply local goblins that had transformed over the winter. Despite the harsh conditions, many of them had apparently been snug and fat enough to feel comfortable. Obviously, Black Nail needed to work the little pests harder. Still, he couldn't complain about having more hobgoblin minions. He'd been expecting to have to build up his forces over the spring once everything in Iron Break was repaired and restocked. The mud from all the melting snow was a real problem. Luckily, Iron Break had been built on high ground with a lot of firm stone, but there were still areas where water was pooling and needed to be drained. Some of the huts were also looking a bit saggy and had to be repaired before they fell over. There was also more good news. The workshops had been very productive over the winter. Load after load of ore and charcoal had gone in, and the workers had used those materials to make thousands of tools and weapons. Black Nail had enough spears and arrows to equip all his troops in Iron Break, although there was still plenty of need for more, especially since he had other minions in other camps that would need to be equipped. Thus, after the inventory was complete, Black Nail began sending out orders and messengers to his other camps. All through the winter, the only place he'd regularly gotten word from had been Shelter. Everywhere else could have been wiped off the face of the earth for all he knew. He needed status reports, and soon it would be time to withdraw all unnecessary minions back to Iron Break so that Black Nail could muster his army and strike at his enemies. Hitting hard and fast while his foes were unprepared had always worked well for Black Nail before, so he intended to move quickly. As the ground dried up over the next few days, and repairs proceeded on Iron Break, messengers began returning from the closer places Black Nail sent them. The hobgoblin from Hers Crest was among the first to return, although he didn't have all that much to report. Illisti was still in charge, and nothing too dramatic had happened in his city. They'd had a difficult winter, although there had been little starvation thanks to the hobgoblin hunters that Black Nail had lent them. Illisti had sent his thanks but had no plans to move anytime soon. He was preoccupied with ruling over his new people. That was fine with Black Nail. He wouldn't need Illisti's help until later. News from all the small settlements Black Nail had ordered set up out in the forest soon followed. Although one or two of them had met some unexpected disasters such as an attack by a troll or starvation, most of them had prospered. The settlements had expanded as new huts went up, and dozens of new hobgoblins had transformed over the winter. The fishing village next to the river had actually managed to somehow double in size since the first snowfall. Black Nail was pleasantly surprised, even though he had no real plan for the settlements from here on. Well, he was going to have to do something with them. He couldn't just leave them unsupervised. So much work. It took a few more days for the messenger from the forward base in the south to return. The reports from there were much the same as from everywhere else. There had been no real developments over the last few months, although quite a few goblins had transformed there too. It seemed like Black Nail's winter had been by far the most eventful. Everyone else had been slacking off while he'd been fighting an underground war and building up an army. Stupid minions. They seriously needed to show some initiative. Obviously, they weren't being yelled at enough. Once he was done receiving all the reports, Black Nail sent out some new orders. All the new hobgoblins from the settlements were to come to Iron Break for training, and Beardy was ordered to send out rangers to scout the nearby roads and villages for any sign of Warwick. Black Nail needed a target. The warm winds that blew through Iron Break had awoken his long-buried passions. His bones ached for action and vengeance, pushing him to hurry his preparations. A few more days of work by Black Nail's minions got most of Iron Break repaired, dried out, and cleaned up. That meant it was time for them to get ready to move. Black Nail's strategy depended on him moving before his human foe was ready, so the Hobgoblin chieftain quickly began mustering his forces and assembling his army. Not all of the Hobgoblins were soldiers and many of the new ones weren't trained properly, but that still left Black Nail with a sizable force. He could afford to bring over 600 Hobgoblins south, where he would get further reinforcements from the forward base and the Hobgoblins stationed there. He also had over 100 human minions he could call up, mostly former bandits he'd recruited and kept at the forward base. There was a lot of work that needed done before Black Nail's army was ready to move though. The Hobgoblins needed to be organized into squads and given a refresher on marching. There was also the problem of equipping them all and gathering up enough supplies for a march. Black Nail's army was too big to depend on hunting and scavenging for food, and they needed to move quickly. Thankfully, this was something Black Nail had planned for. After the defeat of the Boggats, he'd put Farrer in charge of gathering up wagons and making some new ones as well. With help from some craftsmen from Shelter, Farrer had gotten the job done. It had required the making of some new large saws to cut the lumber, and the results weren't pretty, but he'd eventually gotten the carpentry figured out. It wasn't like they'd been short on time, labor, or wood. Thus, Black Nail now had 24 wagons that could carry supplies and enough bristleback boars to pull them. The road to the forward base wasn't quite complete, but they could carry the wagons over the rough patches. That was what minions were for. Some of them weren't good for much else. Farrer had some plans to build a proper sawmill now that Iron Break had a demand for cut lumber, but it wasn't going to happen anytime soon. He wasn't sure what he was going to use to power the mill since the nearby creek wasn't large enough and coming up with a design was proving difficult. Farrer had mentioned possibly using some sort of furnace to power the saw, which made Black Nail glad he was leaving soon and wouldn't have to go anywhere near a contraption like that. Strapping some moving blades to one of Imp's furnaces sounded like a terrible idea, they still occasionally exploded for one thing. Before leaving for the south, Black Nail paid a visit to Shelter. There were people there he had to talk to. Sure. We will help your fellows out with your spring planting, Tannen reassured Black Nail after coming to meet him at the town's gate. It's the least we could do, and probably in our best interest. If we're going to be living beside a tribe of hobgoblins, better they be well fed. Yep, that's true. Hobgoblins are easier to deal with when they're not hungry, Black Nail replied. Tannen could be very practical for a human. Black Nail's ability to keep the good food coming was one of the most important reasons so many hobgoblins listened to him. Black Nail's minions had planted some crops last year, but this year he wanted a lot more sown. There was plenty of room around Iron Break, since they'd cut down so much of the forest for fuel and construction materials. He also wanted it done right this time. Last year the seeds had been scattered around somewhat haphazardly, instead of in neat rows like the humans used. If Black Nail's army spent a lot of time fighting down south, they wouldn't be able to stock up food for the winter, so Iron Break would have to prepare food for them. As he was walking back to Iron Break, Black Nail sighed. Ugh, there was so much that needed done, and so much had changed since Herod's death. He was just a simple hobgoblin, sort of. Why had he taken responsibility for so many hobgoblins, a small city, and a not-so-small portion of the north? Really, his wants were simple, a full stomach, to be the boss of everyone as he so rightly deserved, and to kill Warwick and make a necklace from his teeth. Perhaps he'd also make a pair of pants out of the man's skin. Black Nail smiled as several interesting ideas flashed through his thoughts, but he eventually discarded them. Humans, you make a lot of useful things out of their corpses, but that tended to upset them even when you used complete strangers. Black Nail and most hobgoblins didn't care about such things. As long as it didn't inconvenience him, he didn't what you did with dead hobgoblins or their skin. It was fast approaching supper time when Black Nail got back to Iron Break, so he decided to throw a feast. Tomorrow, he'd be leading an army south, so having a celebration before the long march made sense. Besides, he was hungry and felt like rewarding himself for all his hard work. Leadership was a heavy burden. Thus, Black Nail went to find Gob and get his minions working. The feast wasn't going to make itself. Thankfully, there was enough food in the larder. Hunters had begun bringing in a lot recently, and the high water level was making the caves below humid. This was in turn helping the underground mushroom farms grow. Rabbit and mushroom stew was both filling and delicious, as long as you used the non-poisonous mushrooms, so Black Nail got his minions cooking. He also had some deer brought out to be roasted slowly over the fire on a spit, because it wasn't a real feast with only one dish, and they were very low on vegetables and roots. Soon, the Goblin settlement was a flurry of activity as everyone prepared for the feast. A hearty aroma filled the air as ingredients were dumped into boiling cauldrons and the prepared deer carcasses were roasted above blazing fire pits. Guards had to be posted to keep all the hungry goblins from snatching bits of food before it was done. Black Nail wandered from fire to fire as he checked on all the food and made sure the cooks were doing their jobs properly. This required a lot taste testing, but that was fine with him. When the food was done, instead of withdrawing to his mansion, Black Nail decided to eat outside with everyone else. It was good for him to mingle with his minions occasionally. That way they knew who the boss was, and he could keep an eye on all the suspicious ones. There were a lot of suspicious hobgoblins. Many of them were new and Black Nail hadn't had a chance to beat them up in a sparring match yet. Finding the time was difficult because there was so many of them, so he couldn't be sure how loyal they really were. Probably not very. They were hobgoblins after all. As Black Nail was serving himself the first bowl of stew, as was his right as leader, Hera wandered over to his side and grabbed his arm. "Get me a bowl too," she asked him. Black Nail eyed her skeptically. "Why don't you get your own?" He was the boss here. It wasn't his job to get other people food. Hera let out an annoyed huff but then filled her own bowl. Together, the pair of hobgoblins then wandered over to a table that was well lit by a nearby fire pit. All the other hobgoblins quickly got out of their way. As they ate, Hera scooted up next to Black Nail and pressed her body up against his. This pleased Black Nail. Hera had a nice body. It was soft in all the right places, and her nose wasn't bad looking either. It did have the same sharp majestic shape of Black Nail's own, but it was cute. The two hobgoblins weren't left alone for very long. After Black Nail had taken a few bites of food, Kida appeared out of nowhere and walked over. The hobgoblin chieftain almost choked on his food when he saw her. Why was she here? Meanwhile, Hera got up and gave Kida a quick hug. Black Nail frowned. Since when were hobgoblins hugging people? That shouldn't be a thing. It was unnatural, and one of the least hobgoblin-like things imaginable. Hey! Wow, that stew smells great, the redhead announced as she leaned over Black Nail's bowl. What are you doing here? Black Nail asked the annoying girl. He hadn't told anyone in shelter about the feast. Kida just grinned. I got bored in shelter, and I was thinking that you'd be doing something fun like this. Really, you're very predictable. You'll take any excuse to celebrate and stuff your face. Black Nail sighed. Well, at least she wasn't trying to hug him. Then he'd have to stab her on general principles. I have guards and stuff, just so people can't sneak in without me knowing about it. Those guys? They all know me. I'm like your best friend, so they just let me come and go whenever I want. That didn't sound right to Black Nail. He wasn't exactly sure what a best friend was, but he was fairly sure Kida wasn't his. Unsurprisingly, Kida continued talking. Well, most of them know me. I did have to punch out one stupid hobgoblin on my way in. Whatever, Black Nail replied as he concentrated on eating his food and tried to ignore Kida and Hera as they started gossiping. It didn't take him long to finish up his first bowl, and before he could get up to fetch another, a hobgoblin brought him over a new one. Unfortunately, the hobgoblin had been passed the bowl by Crow, who was now watching from the shadows over to Black Nail's left, so this was probably another assassination attempt. That was too bad. The stew smelled great. It had a tangier smell than Black Nail's first bowl, which was probably caused by the poison. Putting the bowl down, Black Nail dismissed the hobgoblin that had given it to him and called for Crow to come over. Crow flinched in surprise, before reluctantly coming out of hiding and walking over to Black Nail. Oh, hello. Did you want something, boss? Black Nail pushed the bowl towards the nervous hobgoblin. Eat this. Why? Crow asked as he stared at the bowl like it was a venomous snake. Black Nail grinned in a way that didn't reach his eyes. I'm the boss. I don't need a reason. Eat it. Ever so slowly, the hobgoblin did as he was told. As Black Nail watched intently, he scooped up a spoonful of stew and put it in his mouth. He then swallowed. Yum. So good, Crow said. He put the bowl down. His act wasn't very convincing. He was clearly very worried about something. Eat more, Black Nail told him. Crow grimaced as he raised his spoon again, but then his stomach grumbled. It was a loud bubbling sound, that almost made Black Nail wince in sympathy. Crow then stumbled as his face went pale. I need to shit, Crow suddenly squeaked as he trembled in pain. Fine, don't do it here. People are eating, Black Nail replied with a scowl of disgust and a dismissive wave. Immediately, Crow dashed away in an unsteady manner. Black Nail snickered in amusement as he watched. He hoped his treacherous minion didn't die. That would be a tragic waste of a very amusing hobgoblin. Twists and turns too. After the feast was over, Black Nail planned on going to bed. First, he had to deal with Kida though. The young redhead had fallen unconscious after eating several large bowls of stew. The fool had stuffed herself until she'd passed out. That, or some of the mushrooms in the stew had reacted differently when eaten by humans. They'd never actually been tested on humans. Anyway, Kida was still breathing and didn't seem sick, so Black Nail picked her up off the ground and carried her to a spare room in his home, before throwing her on the bed. If he left her outside, someone useful might trip over her and hurt themselves, which would inconvenience him. That done, Black Nail took Hera back to his own room and had some fun before falling asleep next to her. By this point, he was fairly sure she wasn't going to kill him in his sleep, even if he slept with a hidden dagger under his pillow just in case. He'd also faked sleep a few times, but he'd quickly stopped because it was too much work. Sex made him sleepy and there were worse ways to die. The next morning, Black Nail woke up and briefly noted that no one had killed him in his sleep. Good, that meant it was time to march. The spring offensive couldn't wait any longer. Before the sun had completely risen, Black Nail got out of bed and began screaming for everyone to get up and get ready to move. He had a loud voice, so soon hobgoblins were streaming out of their longhouses and forming up into their squads at the training ground. Anyone moving too slowly got yelled at particularly loudly until they picked up their pace. Gob arrived quickly, so Black Nail put him in charge of making sure every squad was ready to move. The fat hobgoblin Rolly, who was usually in charge of the larder and supplies, checked on the wagons and made sure the army supplies were in order. Imp also eventually showed up. Black Nail wanted him along on the expedition because he was best at using the mage staff and could do things other mages couldn't. The mage didn't want to leave his workshop and experiments, but Black Nail didn't give him a choice. Soon, everything was ready, and the army began to march out of Iron Break and towards shelter. Black Nail took the lead while Gob had command of the back. Farrer and Rolly both stayed behind to run things while Black Nail was gone. Neither of them were warriors, but they shouldn't be doing too much fighting. There was no sign of the Boggots in Black Nail's territory, and all the hostile humans lived far away. After some discussion, it was decided that Grey would remain behind. The lurker's sensitive eyes made it difficult for him to travel above ground during the day, and he was needed to supervise the trogs in the mine. Also, he specialized at scouting and fighting underground, which Black Nail wasn't expecting to do. His target was Warwick, not the Boggots. Unfortunately, Kida came along, if only so that Black Nail could keep an eye on her. He shuddered to think about all the trouble she'd cause if she was left alone in Iron Break. Hera pulled the redhead out of bed and they both took up position behind Black Nail as the army moved. Black Nail also made sure Crow came along for similar reasons. The treacherous hobgoblin had survived his food poisoning, so Black Nail didn't want to leave him unsupervised among the new hobgoblins in Iron Break, lest he spread his own disloyalty. Plus, he was amusing, and it was going to be a long march. The force of hobgoblins moved quickly over the road they'd built as they approached shelter. The forest was still around them. Although the green was full of terrors, few of them wanted anything to do with the hobgoblin army. The heavy thump of footsteps drowned out all the natural sounds of the forest. There was plenty to see though. The forest was coming alive as the last touch of winter faded. There were clusters of bright evergreens, but most the trees were covered in small green leaves that had just budded. This gave the scenery a fresh and vibrant look that put a spring in Black Nail's step. Geralt and about 24 other men met Black Nail outside of shelter. Most of them were former members of Herod's band, but others were villagers or refugees that had decided to join Black Nail's fight. Some of them wanted to defend their new homes, while others simply wanted to win some loot, and a few had been sent along to observe what Black Nail was doing by interested parties. So, once again we're heading south, where war awaits us, with all its glory and all its terrors, Geralt had observed stoically as the humans joined the procession. I'll be doing most the fighting, Black Nail reassured him. You just need to talk to other humans for me. You're good at that. Geralt grinned proudly. I do have a certain way with words. People have frequently remarked on the eloquence of my tongue. Black Nail nodded politely and moved on. Once everyone was in place, the army quickly began marching to their next destination, the forward base. This journey took a little longer. Not only was it further away, but the road wasn't complete yet. This meant the troops had to march over tight muddy paths in some places and push the wagons along. Thus, it took 4 days for Black Nail to reach the forward base, and even then, he was forced to leave some of the wagons behind with guards. It would be another few days until they caught up. As Black Nail was ordering his troops to line up at the entrance to the forward base, which was surrounded by a wooden stake wall, Beardy came out to meet him. No wait. He'd changed his name to Ralphie. Black Nail sometimes forgot that, since it was such a stupid name. Beardy was far superior. He should have kept that name. So, you're finally here, Ralphie huffed. Took you long enough. Watching over this place for you was a chore and a half, let me tell you. You did a good job, Black Nail replied with a happy nod. He'd been away for several months and the place hadn't burnt down. That was impressive. Damn right I did. Keeping all these hobgoblins and bandits from dying or killing each other over the winter wasn't easy. There were several near riots caused by feuding hobs, and one green bastard tried to declare himself chief. I had to put him down personally. That much trouble wasn't unexpected. Not only had Black Nail kept 200 hobgoblins in the forward base over the winter, but it was also where most the human bandits he'd collected had stayed as well. There were about 200 of them, and they were mostly the remains of bandit bands who'd gone against Warwick and lost. Grinning, Kida walked over to join the conversation. Don't worry. I'll take some of that work out of your hands. I'll be leading my own men now that I'm here. This earned her a pair of scowls. The young redhead had spent some time last year recruiting and assembling her own group of bandits. She hadn't wintered in at the forward base with them though. Instead, she'd followed Black Nail north, because it was far less boring there and she had a short attention span. Knock yourself out, Ralphie replied with a shake of his head. Don't expect any help from me though. Anyone dumb enough to follow you deserves what's coming to them. The large bearded man then turned to Black Nail. Your messages were a little lacking in details, but from the look of your troops, I'm guessing you want to go on the attack. Yes, have you gotten any new information since the last message you sent me? Black Nail asked him. They were both ignoring Kida now, who was pouting. Ralphie shrugged. Some. I've been patrolling the roads to collect tolls, and even this early in the season, we've had a few groups of refugees and merchants. People are saying it's a dark time and blaming some attacks and disappearances on demons. Nothing too unusual though. These days villages are always getting ransacked by one band or another. What about Warwick? No new word of him. He's out there, but he seems to be keeping his distance. What are you planning? I'm going to kill him, Black Nail replied deadpan. Ralphie snorted rudely. Even you plan more thoroughly than that. Give me details. I'm going to attack him before he is ready for me. My troops will rampage across the north and kill every one of his men we find. And when he counterattacks, you'll be spread out and weak when his hammer comes down. Then I'll retreat. I don't need to hold anything but this base, and while he is reconquering everything, I'll be harassing him and building up my forces. The more I take, the longer it will take for him to get here. Ralphie looked thoughtful as he scratched his nose. Hey, it's not a bad plan. I wouldn't want to try it with regular troops. Your hobgoblins on the other hand, they'll be hard to pin down. They can flee into the woods and survive to regroup. And unlike some dumb humans, they will always run from hard fights unless I'm there to command them, Black Nail added. We should probably head east quickly then, although I'm not sure if we should use hobgoblins or humans to hold villages. Neither of them are well behaved. I will solve that problem later, Black Nail replied as he walked past Ralphie into the forward base. The base had been built over the ruins of an old village that had been swallowed by the forest years ago. Thus, a few of the buildings were repaired village huts, but most of them were newly constructed log buildings that served as barracks for the troops stationed there. Now that he'd arrived, Black Nail went to get something to eat. The occupants of the base collected dues from caravans, so there was undoubtedly some good human food hidden away somewhere, and as the leader, it was rightfully his. After sniffing around and finding some cheese and pickles, Black Nail allowed Gob to bring some leadership matters to his attention. Most importantly, his minions needed to set up camp. There wasn't room for everyone inside, and they weren't going to move out right away. His minions deserved a rest, outside, while he slept in a proper hut. There was one reserved for him, since he was the leader. The next morning, while all the troops were getting ready to head out, Black Nail called all his lieutenants to a meeting. Gob, Kida, Ralphie, and Geralt were quick to arrive. We will hit our first target, the village in the east, and then I will decide on our next move. What I choose depends on what Warwick's men are doing, but I'll probably split the army up. Are you talking about the village of Aldhera? Ralphie asked. Sure, that one, Black Nail replied. What did that name even mean? Humans were terrible at naming things. I'm ready to go, Kida added happily. My men look forward to wetting their blades on Warwick's scum. Ralphie rolled his eyes. I seriously doubt that. More likely they plan on hanging back until they see a chance to do some looting. Well, I'll drive them forward into the teeth of the enemy. Cowards have no place in my elite. Black Nail couldn't stop himself from letting out a groan. Elite? Of course. I'm a vessel after all, and I only accept the best. You accept anyone who will put up with your stupidity, Black Nail told her. He knew exactly the sort of people Kida had recruited. Anyone who works under me is an elite. You'll see how successful my forces are after we split up and I get my own command. That's not going to happen. After a bit more arguing, the meeting was called to an end. Kida refused to give up the idea of her own command, so Black Nail let it go. It didn't matter what she thought. He wasn't going to put her in charge of anything. That wasn't going to happen. With the meeting over, the lieutenants went back to their troops and began relaying orders. Soon, the now reinforced army was marching away from the forward base. It didn't take them long to get out of the forest and reach the old human-built road. Once on there, their speed picked up considerably. Black Nail took up position at the very front with Hera and his bodyguards. There he could promptly deal with any problems or situations that came up. He also sent patrols ahead to screen their way and divert any caravans traveling toward them. He didn't want anyone getting a good look at his army or seeing where it was going. Word of what they saw would eventually get back to Warwick. There were several nearby small villages that lay on the road. However, these settlements had already been subjugated by Ralphie and Black Nail last year, so Black Nail led his army right past them. His target was the walled town of Aldhera, which was the closest place controlled by Warwick. The word passed on by merchants was that Warwick had left a small garrison of his own troops there. Unfortunately, it wasn't that close and would take a few days to reach. When the day began to darken, and Black Nail called for his army to come to a halt, he didn't bother trying to order them off the road. His chosen spot had a small clearing around some hills off to one side, but he had most his troops set up camp right on the road. Black Nail wasn't too worried about moving undetected and his force was a little too big to easily hide in the forest anyway. The night was uneventful and restful. After setting up the cooking fires, they had a late supper under the quickly darkening sky while the spring wind blew through the trees. Overhead, the night sky was dotted by clouds, but the light of the moon and stars shone through without a problem most of the time. As the leader, Black Nail had a blanket and tent, although many of the hobgoblins and even some of the humans were forced to share or go completely without a tent and sleep out under the stars. Black Nail was glad he was better than them. It took 3 more days of traveling before they closed in on their destination. By then they were far away from any of the roads that Black Nail's minions patrolled or even kept watch over. That was when one of the scouts Black Nail had sent up ahead came back with news that they'd found the town of Aldhera. Black Nail listened to the scout's report and description of the town and then began giving out orders. As his strung-out army began reforming into tighter lines, he sent squads of hobgoblins to range ahead and surround the town. He didn't want anyone escaping from the town and getting word to Warwick. When you were hunting prey, it was important to make sure they didn't know you were coming. When his army was ready to move again, Black Nail had them march toward the town at a brisk pace, so that they'd get as little warning as possible. The humans and hobgoblins were tired, but also eager to finally reach their destination. The ranks of marching warriors filled the breadth of the road. Within minutes, they went around a bend and the walls of the town appeared before them. They were simple wooden walls like most remote northern villages had, but in Aldhera's case they actually had a strong-looking stone gatehouse with an arch above the wooden doors. Move faster. I want a quick march. Keep up with me. Black Nail yelled as he raised his weapon and picked up his speed. Immediately, his forces lurched forward as they headed straight for the open gate. There was a bloodthirsty yell from the hobgoblins. It was unlikely they'd make it before the gates were closed, but Black Nail might get lucky. The enemy had no reason to expect an attack. Unfortunately, as Black Nail's forces quickly moved to within 100 feet of the gate, it swung shut with a muted boom and creak of wood. Grunting in displeasure, Black Nail yelled for his minions to slow their advance. There was no point in tiring themselves out now. From the other side of the gate, Black Nail could hear lots of men shouting. It seemed like there really was a garrison in this town and that they were ready for action. Well, I'm going to have to do this the hard way, Black Nail remarked as he studied the sturdy structure his minions were advancing toward. At least he was finally going to get a proper fight. It had been quite a while since Black Nail had enjoyed a chance to let his blade tear into human flesh, and he hated everyone who worked for Warwick ever so much for what they'd taken from him. The hobgoblin shivered in anticipation of the fight. Twists and turns 3. We should give our foes a chance to surrender, Geralt had said as walked over to Black Nail. There is no point in starting a needless fight if there is a chance of avoiding bloodshed. I like bloodshed, a lot, Black Nail replied as he glanced at the man. Why did Geralt feel the need to ruin this for him? Black Nail's forces had just arrived in front of the walled town of Aldhera. It lay just beyond the eastern edge of Black Nail's territory, and it had been garrisoned by a group of Warwick's men. The road behind Black Nail was packed with his hobgoblin and human troops. They were waiting for orders and the atmosphere was heavy with the anticipation that came before a battle. Geralt grimaced. Unless they have a far more fighters manning those walls than it appears, they stand no chance of victory. We should give them an opportunity to prevent a slaughter. Black Nail rolled his eyes. Why? I like slaughter and they're the enemy. I don't want them to live. They work for Warwick. Killing them is the entire point. It's normal civilized behavior for humans. Having mercy and restraint is important or we'd be killing each other constantly. Black Nail frowned and thought back to all the battles he'd been a part of. No, that's not true at all. Herad didn't let people surrender and no one ever really offered it to her. Geralt hesitated, but before he could come up with a reply, a messenger arrived. He was one of the hobgoblins Black Nail had sent out into the forest to surround the town and watch it. It's all quiet in the trees, boss. The stupid humans have no scouts out, just watchers on the walls. The walls look strong though. They've been all fixed up recently and all holes in them have been plugged so that we can't sneak through. Climbing in unseen would also be hard. After listening to the report, Black Nail sighed. He'd been hoping there would be a way to sneak in. With a small force at his back, he could probably cut his way to the gate and open it, and he liked being sneaky and clever. Now it seemed like he would have to assault the gate. He could build a ram and batter it open, but blasting it open with magic would probably be easier. Magic was just so convenient. As Black Nail thought his options over, Geralt took the opportunity to speak up. See. There is no easy way to take the town, and you don't want to lose minions if it's not necessary. That would weaken you before you face Warwick again. Give me a chance to ask them to lay down their arms. Fine. Whatever. Make it quick, Black Nail told him. There would other opportunities to kill Warwick's men. With a pleased nod, Geralt immediately began walking down the road toward the gate. When he was close enough to easily be heard, he began yelling. Heil the town. I've come bringing a peaceful proposition. We've no interest in talking to any man in service to evil beasts, someone yelled back a moment later. This response seemed to startle Geralt, because he froze. It took him several seconds to come up with a reply, which was unusual for him. Then you should have no problem talking to me. I've come in peace and good faith to prevent unnecessary violence. We have nothing to say to you. You won't be getting us to lower our guards while that host of inhuman creatures lurks out there. We're not fools. The second we drop out weapons they'll be on us like Highland wolves on sheep. The Black Nail has a reputation. Indeed he does, one of mercy and honoring his word. He has no interest in murder, and many of the men you see in his army were once his enemies. And I say, anyone under the employ of a brigand such as the wolf has little ground to stand on there. He is not known for his mercy. At least he is human. Besides, betraying Warwick is a sure way to earn a hard death. We'd rather take our chances with a battle. At least then we'd die on our feet, like men. Come now. You must be able to see the force assembled against you. It is mighty, and you are far outnumbered. Surrender, there is no shame in it. Needless battle would serve no purpose but to feed the crows, Geralt yelled. He was starting to sound rather exasperated. We've rallied the locals and every good human is worth 3 little hobgoblins. We don't fear little green savages. Black Nail snorted. Stupid humans. Under favorable conditions, a human might be worth 1.5 hobgoblins. However, not only did Black Nail have more than that, but he wasn't going to give them that kind of fight. He wasn't stupid enough to go head to head with them, where humans could use their greater weight and muscle against hobgoblins. Then there was Black Nail's own presence. He was worth a good 100 humans anyway. Growing frustrated, Gerlod tried for several more minutes to convince the enemy to surrender. They eventually grew tired of his nonsense though. Still your tongue already. We won't be surrendering anything to that stupid green monster that you call master, the enemy leader yelled. This annoyed Black Nail. As a mutant he might sort of be a monster, but he definitely wasn't stupid, and he didn't appreciate being called that by some humans. With their bizarre instincts, it was amazing most humans survived to adulthood. Black Nail wasn't too annoyed though. There was easy way prove his great intellect and show the enemy who was smarter. He'd simply slaughter the fools. They'd really look dumb then, when they were corpses. Grinning, Black Nail walked up behind Geralt and put a hand on his shoulder. You tried. Now, it's my turn. Geralt sighed in disappointment as he looked back at Black Nail. What are you going to do? I'm going to attack them, Black Nail replied as he turned to begin barking orders at his troops. He already had a plan, a great one. They were constantly popping into his head, because he was a genius. It didn't take long for Black Nail to get things moving. Soon, he was leading a large squad of his toughest warriors straight for the gate while the rest of his army followed behind in support. Hera was right beside him, leading his bodyguard, while Imp was in the center of the group. All the hobgoblins were grinning in anticipation of an easy fight. There were few things they liked better than the chance to shed some human blood. For most of them, there was no malice involved, humans and other prey were just fun to torment and kill. It was instinct. How would they react when the hobgoblins broke into the town? Black Nail licked his lips. Chasing them as they ran around screaming would very amusing. As he marched forward, Black Nail shook his head to clear his thoughts. He needed to focus on the task at hand. He wasn't far from the gate now. A few scattered arrows flew out from behind the wall, but none of them landed anywhere near Black Nail, so he ignored them and turned to Imp. Open the gate. The hobgoblin mage nodded and raised his mechanical staff. Around him, the other hobgoblins came to a stop. There were more subtle ways of getting into the town, but Black Nail didn't feel like waiting. The humans here had insulted him and had to be shown the error of their ways. He still wanted the town intact, but gates could be repaired. As Black Nail and the warriors watched, a rippling blast of transparent power shot out of Imp's staff. It tore through the air before hitting the center of the town's gate. There was a loud boom and the air shuddered as the magic exploded. The gates shook under the power of the explosion and then the wood bent and splintered. With a loud crack, the gate on the right came loose and partially collapsed, creating a gap in the center of the doorway that was wide enough for two people to walk through. I can hit it again, Imp offered. No, that's fine, Black Nail replied as he motioned his troops forward and began running. The wooden doors looked wrecked and jammed now. Further blasts might widen the gap, but they might also do nothing or even make it smaller, and Imp didn't have unlimited mana crystals to power his staff. Picking up speed, Black Nail charged straight for the gate. The enemy on the other side of it quickly began to react as well. Several armed men who looked like Warwick's troops took up position to block his entrance. Black Nail just licked his lips and drew his blade from its sheath. It came free with an eager-sounding hiss that was music to the hobgoblin's ears. The sight of Black Nail barreling toward them made the troops guarding the hole in the gate blanch. He was noticeably taller than a normal hobgoblin, even more than most humans, and his antler-like horns made him look taller still. His second transformation had also made Black Nail bulkier, with thicker limbs and muscles, and this was also emphasized by his black leather armor. All in all, there was no way the humans could mistake Black Nail for an average hobgoblin. Fear was obvious on the human guards' faces, but Black Nail could also sense it using his magic, and he could use that. Gathering up his own power from his core, Black Nail fed the power up into his head and then sent it out. The magic washed forth like a wave, igniting the fear within the enemy and twisting it into numbing terror. There were 3 men blocking Black Nail's way into the town, and all 3 of them stumbled back as he fell upon them. Without mercy, Black Nail lunged through the hole in the gate and slashed at the closest man. His blade sliced through the air with stunning speed and tore into the man's arm. The blow almost cut the limb right off, and the man screamed in pain as Black Nail grabbed his shoulder and tossed him aside so he could get at his next target. The invigorating heat of magic was still rising up from Black Nail's core, but now it was feeding his muscles and trickling into his blood. The guard to Black Nail's left overcame his terror and slashed at Black Nail with a clumsy overhead swing. Black Nail just snorted dismissively as he spun his blade around and stabbed the man in the chest. He then kicked the man away and tugged his sword free. The last nearby guard turned to run, so Black Nail grabbed his collar, pulled him close, and then slit his throat with a flick of his blade. As his victim collapsed, Black Nail studied his new surroundings. He was on the other side of the gate now. The town lay before him, and there were lots more armed humans around, at least 2 dozen. However, instead of retreating, Black Nail just grinned and began stomping forward. Behind him, hobgoblins began pushing through the gap in the gate and entering the town. For several moments, Warwick's men stared at Black Nail in shock. In response, Black Nail burned his power. The fear-inciting magic boiled off him like an invisible cloud and visibly slammed into the humans. They flinched or stumbled back. Their weakness thrilled Black Nail, sending shivers down his spine. Practically purring, he threw himself at the biggest clump of men and lashed out with his long blade. His magically enhanced blows crashed through defenses and hacked through flesh with ease, sending blood flying in every direction. Pain-filled screams filled the air. Instead of rallying and trying to counterattack, the enemy hesitated. This allowed time for more hobgoblins to spill into the town and form a mob of their own. As Black Nail finished off the last nearby human with a bone-crunching stomp to the man's chest, the mob of hobgoblin spearmen threw themselves into combat. There were still lots of enemy soldiers around, so Black Nail spun around and ran over to cover his minions' flanks as they fought. On his way he cut down 2 more enemies who tried to stop him. More of Warwick's troops began to arrive. Desperately, they threw themselves into combat in an attempt to prevent the hobgoblins from spilling into the town. The enemy commander had held troops in reserve and stationed guards all along the walls, but now he threw everything he had at Black Nail. It didn't work. Black Nail crushed every human in his way as he cut his way deeper into the town. Human after human was brutally dispatched by swings of his blade, and his minions surged forward in a growing wave of spears and green. The scent of blood grew strong as the dead piled up, and Black Nail began to notice some different-looking humans mingled among the others. They were dressed in plain clothes instead of leather armor, and many of them wielded tools such as axes and pitchforks instead of real weapons. Black Nail just laughed and cut them down regardless. They were even easier to kill. Laughing joyfully over the screams, Black Nail continued to throw himself into the press. However, the enemy ranks quickly began to grow thin, and then they broke. As he stopped to watch, the nearby human began to turn and flee into the town. Some of his nearby minions started to give chase, but Black Nail stopped them with a yell and told them to stay together. The enemy didn't have anywhere to flee to, except into the green, so there was no rush. Seizing the gate was the priority anyway. Soon, many more of Black Nail's minions had entered through the broken gate, including some humans. So, Black Nail left a strong force behind to hold it, and then took about 100 hobgoblins deeper into the town, toward the largest homes in sight. That was where he'd find the leaders, or at least the best loot. This was turning into a great day. The front door of the biggest house in town was locked, of course. However, it was shut by a simple wooden latch, which Black Nail easily broke by slamming the door with his shoulder. He then stepped inside and looked around. It seemed like he was in the right place. Everything in sight was more lavish looking than the contents of an average villager's home, which were usually dirty and dim. There was no one in sight, but Black Nail heard creaks from upstairs, so he followed his nose over to the kitchen and told the minions that had followed him inside to round up the residents and bring them to him. After a quick raid of the pantry for anything that smelled tasty, Black Nail wandered over to a couch in the sitting room and waited. That was when Geralt had hurried in. The young man was out of breath, but he looked relieved to have caught up. Black Nail offered him some of the worst tasting pie, but the man shook his head and concentrated on catching his breath. His lose. As Black Nail ate, there was a brief scuffle upstairs and some yelling, but nothing major. Soon, his minions dragged everyone in the house in front of him. He studied them as he finished off some blue cheese. There were 3 adult women, 1 man, and 2 children. One of the women was much better dressed than the others, so Black Nail assumed the other 2 were servants of some kind. That meant the remaining humans were the leader and his family. They gazed at the hobgoblins with unconcealed terror, even though Black Nail wasn't doing anything with his magic anymore. One of the children was female and the other was male. The female looked to be older than the male, but Black Nail didn't pay them much attention. They weren't important. He also dismissed the 2 female servants in their plain black dresses. I'm in charge now. Who are you? Black Nail asked the town leader. He was a short man with a curly mustache that made Black Nail want to pull on it. Humans weren't supposed to have whiskers like rats. The man paled and hesitated before answering. I was the mayor. What are you going to do with me? Please don't kill me. I haven't done anything wrong. His wife threw him a nasty look, as if annoyed that he hadn't asked about her. She was taller than her husband and had a proud demeanor he lacked. The children just hugged one of the maids, like she was the only thing preventing them from drowning. Ha, they were stupid little critters. Amusing though. Your people attacked me, Black Nail pointed out. I even sent someone over to offer you a nice surrender, but you helped Warwick's men instead. I think that was wrong. The mayor flinched. Those bandits seized this town. They didn't ask me for permission. If some poor fools from here tried to fight you, it wasn't because I told them to do anything. Black Nail nodded. Maybe, but you're still the leader, I should probably kill. There was loud cough from Geralt, who until now had stayed in the background. He hurried over to Black Nail's side, leaned down, and began whispering. You shouldn't kill the mayor yet. You don't actually know if he has done anything wrong. Black Nail sighed. He's the boss, so he's responsible and needs to be punished. That's how things work. He lost, so he dies and I take over. That's not how it works with humans. Well, not usually. It's quite possible he had nothing to do with the villagers that fought against us. They could have been going against his wishes or been forced to do it by the bandits. So? What do you want me do? He'll lie if I ask him anything, Black Nail pointed out. Let me take some men and question the townsfolk. That way I'll be able to figure out what happened. We could even have a trial, which should keep the people placated. If you kill their mayor without justification, they might get angry. Black Nail wasn't sure if he cared if the people here were angry or not. This wasn't shelter. He didn't need anything from them, only that they stay out of his way. Still, Geralt had seemed to be offering to do all the work. Annoying human nonsense like this was also why he'd brought Geralt along. He'd put a lot of effort into recruiting Geralt into his force, so he may as well listen to him. Fine, do it your way. I'll tell my hobs to let you take charge. You need to find me someone to blame for everything though. Someone is guilty. No being annoying and saying the people responsible are already dead or I'm killing the mayor. Geralt grimaced but nodded. Black Nail was satisfied, so as the mayor and his family trembled and watched, he remained sitting on the couch and began finishing off the last bits of food he'd taken from the kitchen. The town was his, and he had lots of good food, so any more killing could wait. Twists and turns 4. As his minions took the mayor's family away to be questioned by Geralt, Black Nail lounged on their couch, which was quite comfy and soft. By the time he had finished eating and gotten up, his forces had seized complete control of the streets of Aldhera. He received reports as the remaining enemies were cornered and cut down, fled into green, or took shelter inside homes. There was no more serious resistance, so Black Nail had plenty of time to decide what to do next. First, he had the houses that the enemy were hiding in surrounded so that he could deal with them later. If he let his hobs storm inside and start dragging people out, it could get messy quick. None of the villagers were resisting his takeover anymore, and he wanted to keep it that way. Second, he sent a few hunting parties off to track down and finish off the enemies that had fled into the forest. That wouldn't be particularly hard for his hobgoblin scouts. Few humans would even see them coming in the green, and even the most aware ones had to sleep sometime. Really, very few of them would have gotten far without being eaten by wildlife even without hobgoblins chasing them. Once those two things were done, Black Nail had his lieutenants join him in the mayor's home, which was his now. He liked it, although there was too much lace on the furniture. That could be torn or chewed off easily enough though. The half-dozen hobgoblins and humans all easily fit in the house's sitting room. To Gob and Ralphie, he gave orders to handle the last scattered groups of Warwick's men. Geralt had already had a job, finding someone for Black Nail to blame for the villagers' resistance. That left Kidda and Imp. Imp didn't have any interest in anything that wasn't magical and could be ignored, but Kidda was another story. Black Nail only wished he could ignore her. "You'll stay here with me and Hera, in case something important happens," Black Nail told the redhead. He actually just wanted to keep her out of the way. She wasn't useful enough to help him with anything important that came up, but she had a knack for getting into trouble when left alone. Surprisingly, Kidda shook her head. "You'll have to do without me. I need to go recruit some more followers before anyone beats me to it. There are several fools that think they could do a better job than me and become one of your lieutenants, and I can't just kill them all. I got to stay ahead of them." Black Nail grunted sourly. "That's nice, but you have to do what I say, since I'm the leader. You don't even want me for anything, and this is important. How am I supposed to become a great bandit if I don't recruit followers?" "I'm going," Kidda said as she stuck out her tongue and then turned to leave. Black Nail scowled at her back. He could order some of his hobs to stop her, but then she'd get all whiny and annoying for days. It was better to let her do what she wanted. "Fine, you can go," he told her as she walked out the door. She didn't look back, which made Black Nail's scowl deepen. Stupid Kidda. Everyone else was afraid of him, as was proper. She was just too stupid to know better. How had she survived this long? After waiting with Hera for a while, Black Nail grew bored with scratching the furniture. Thankfully, that was when Geralt had returned. He'd found the people responsible for inciting some of the townsfolk to fight Black Nail and his minions. Apparently, the ringleader was an innkeeper who'd accepted coin from the leader of Warwick's men in return for promising to whip up a mob to help them fight. Geralt now had the man under guard, which pleased Black Nail, and finally motivated him to leave the sitting room. Heading outside, Black Nail went to check on Gob and Ralphie. Before he could move on to the fun stuff, he needed to make sure he had complete control of the town, so all of Warwick's men needed cleaned up. Thankfully, that job was almost done. After Black Nail had sent them out, Gob and Ralphie had quickly moved to order squads into homes where enemies were hiding. If they resisted or attempted to take hostages, they were cut down, but those that surrendered peacefully were taken captive. Human minions were used, since sending hobgoblins into people's homes tended to provoke negative reactions. When Black Nail met up with Gob and Ralphie, they only had 2 more houses to deal with, so Black Nail watched them finish up. It was quick and bloody work. When they were done, Black Nail gave them a nod of approval and then ordered them to marshal the local population so that he could talk to them in the town square. It took a while for this to happen. The people of Aldhera were reluctant to come out of their homes and gather outside now that Black Nail's forces were in control of the town. Black Nail had to go get the mayor and have him tell people it was safe, and even then it took a few hours. However, a decent-sized crowd eventually gathered in the town square. They looked nervous and whispered fearfully amongst themselves, but they didn't try to run or riot. Instead, they fell silent and listened as Black Nail began speaking. Many of them seemed surprised that he could talk, which was amusing. Humans could be so stupid. There was no way they hadn't heard about him by now. He was kind of a big deal. After a brief introduction, Black Nail informed the townsfolk that he was now in charge of the village but that he wouldn't be killing any of them, except for the innkeeper, who he promptly beheaded for inciting violence against his troops and as a warning to the others. That done, he told the townsfolk to go about their business as usual, except large gatherings were prohibited and he'd be taking all their cheese. There was a price to pay for losing a battle. If they didn't want to lose all their cheese, they shouldn't have let Warwick conquer them. Still, now that he'd gotten rid of the humans who were too stupid to live, Black Nail planned on generally leaving the others alone. This was mostly because he didn't really need the townsfolk for anything. He was only here because the town had strategic value in his fight against Warwick. He'd burn the place down, but that would disturb his human allies, who were always looking for reasons to distrust him. Things settled down after the crowd dispersed, leaving Black Nail with the task of finding places for his troops to set up for the night. There were too many of them for them to all sleep inside, so most had to set up their tents outside, like they had when they'd been marching. Black Nail slept in the mayor's house with Hera, of course. He was the leader. The next morning, Black Nail got up early to receive reports from his scouts before calling his lieutenants to another meeting. There were so many meetings involved in war. Seizing Aldhera and eliminating the troops there was simply the first step in Black Nail's plan. Now that he had a base of operations and knew more about the local situation, it was time to continue the attack. His plan depended on a series of lightning fast strikes, so that was what he was going to do. According to his scouts and the locals his minions had interrogated, Warwick only had small forces in the nearby villages and towns. That meant Black Nail could split his forces and take them out quickly before Warwick even knew what was going on. Of course, each force he sent out would need a competent and dependable leader, which was a problem. Black Nail had 3 targets in mind and planned on staying in Aldhera. He also only had 2 lieutenants he really trusted to lead anything more important than a work crew, Gob and Ralphie. Black Nail had been planning on sending Geralt and one of his more trusted hobgoblin warriors to the third town, but Geralt had apparently managed to trip and hurt his ankle last night, so he wanted to stay here. I'll go in his place. Kida suggested eagerly. I've got more than enough men to take a town or two. But do you have the brains? Black Nail mumbled sourly. The redhead gave him a look. What? It's just one town. I only want the one town taken. Don't go looking for more towns to attack, Black Nail said with a sigh. Can't you just stay out of trouble and not be so annoying? I'm a deadly bandit mistress, I'm supposed to get into trouble. Black Nail sighed again. He didn't have anyone more competent to send, and how badly could she really screw up such a simple job? Really, Black Nail didn't care much if she ended up destroying the village completely, as long as it clearly her fault and not his. Fine, you can lead the third team, Black Nail told her. Yes. My first conquest. Soon, there will be many more, Kida laughed as she ran off to gather her followers. She worries me sometimes, Geralt remarked. Ralphie chuckled. She has always worried me. Something isn't right in that girl's head. Black Nail nodded in agreement before giving his other lieutenants some more details about their mission. Kida should have been here too, but she'd ran off before anyone could say anything. What a fool. Soon, over half of the troops in Aldhara were marching back out onto the road. The sudden reduction in power made Black Nail slightly nervous, but he had scouts out watching the roads and there had been no sign of any movements from Warwick. He was probably safe. When Black Nail's lieutenants were all gone, there wasn't much for him to do in Aldhara, beyond lounge around in the mayor's house and eat the townsfolk's food. The locals were terrified of him, and after the execution of the innkeeper, they all obeyed his edicts. When an entire day went by without anything interesting happening, Black Nail seriously considered making up some new, more difficult rules for the townsfolk to follow. It would be amusing to watch them run around and fail, just so he could punish them. Unfortunately, Geralt had managed to convince him that would be a bad idea. Thus, the only real productive thing Black Nail could do was go over reports that his scouts brought in. They didn't tell him much. The roads were clear and there were no signs of enemy troop movements or reconnaissance. There was actually less traffic on them than was usual for this part of the year, just a few merchants and woodsmen. This left Black Nail with a lot of time to worry about things beyond his control. Kida's mission in particular worried him. Who knew what crazy nonsense she'd end up doing? The complete lack of movement from Warwick was also starting to concern him. He'd expected to hear something from the bandit lord by now, but there was simply nothing. Black Nail began to suspect a vast conspiracy of stupidity was misleading him. Maybe Warwick was nearby, and all his minions were too incompetent to notice. Should he go do some scouting himself? Thankfully, word began to arrive from his lieutenants. This distracted Black Nail enough to prevent him from running out into the green to search for hidden armies. The first message reported that Gob had easily conquered his target and taken out the few bandits Warwick had tasked with guarding it. He was on his way back now. The message from Ralphie was a little more worrying. Apparently, Warwick's men had abandoned the village he'd gone to attack. They'd pulled out right after the snow had melted and gone back east. Apparently, the village itself had suffered over the winter and was barely worth taking any more. Ralphie's report was a little lacking in details, but he promised to bring more information with him when he got back. Kida didn't send a message at all. This worried Black Nail at first, but then she showed up in person with all her troops. Didn't I give you a mission? Black Nail said as he met her at the town gates. And I tried to do it. I simply ran into a small problem along the way, Kida replied with a scowl. When I got to the village you wanted me to conquer, there was no one there. The whole soggy village was unoccupied. Black Nail sighed. He'd been worried about this. You can't just kill everyone and pretend it didn't happen. That's not what happened. It really was completely empty when I got there. The entire place had been ransacked weeks ago, but there were no bodies in sight. Everyone was just gone. It was emptier than a drunk's bottle. Humans don't just disappear. They always leave a mess, Black Nail told her. He was an expert on this. Some of your hobs found traces of old boggart tracks, Kida told him. Hey, that made more sense. Black Nail supposed that boggarts could have taken out the village. Apparently, they were far away enough from Iron Break that the creatures thought they didn't have to worry about him. He'd have to find some way of teaching them otherwise. This was his territory now, not theirs. He'd conquered it properly. They didn't get to come in and steal his food and humans without a fight. Still, ignoring the boggarts, this was a third village where there had been no sign of Warwick. The wolf was supposed to have fortified this area, but only Aldhara had contained a proper garrison. There was no way Warwick would think that was enough to hold the entire area and support an attack. Black Nail was really starting to worry now. It was swiftly becoming obvious that there was something going on that he wasn't aware of. Ralphie and Gob returned the next day. Ralphie came in first and a disgruntled Black Nail met him at the gates. The hobgoblin chieftain wanted an immediate report. There's not much to say about Warwick's troops, Ralphie explained with a shrug. There were only about 30 of them, and they fled the village as soon as the roads were clear enough of snow for them to march. Why? A man on horseback arrived with orders. No one knew exactly what he said to them though. Frustrated, Black Nail scowled. Strange. That doesn't make sense. Maybe he guessed you were coming and decided not to leave men around for you to pick off. Then why not fortify Aldhara more? That would be the smart thing to do, and Warwick isn't dumb, Black Nail hissed angrily. There was a plan. It had taken him a long time to come up with, and it was supposed to be the best way to deal with Warwick. Had he been tricked? Did you see or hear anything strange? Black Nail asked Ralphie. The villagers did mention some disappearances. Mostly of animals, but 2 people did go missing. They also said they saw large shapes moving around in the shadows at night, but it was probably nothing, or a hungry bear. These villages in the middle of nowhere get quite superstitious. More boggets, Black Nail grumbled thoughtfully. Was that the answer? Those things? They aren't that dangerous. Just pests really. Black Nail gave Ralphie an annoyed look. They can be very dangerous. I chased all the ones around Iron Breakaway after I defeated their swarm. That was a tough fight. Here, they've been free to hunt people though. They must have a nest nearby. I guess that makes sense, Ralphie remarked reluctantly. Even wolves will pick off people if they get hungry during the winter. Instead of replying, Black Nail ignored the man and started thinking. From experience, he knew that humans wouldn't believe him if he told them all about his war with the boggets. For some reason, they always thought he was exaggerating about the size of the bogget swarm and all the weapons it had wielded. They couldn't accept the idea of boggets using tools or magic. They seemed to think both those things were hard to figure out. They weren't. Even goblins could do them if they had someone to copy. Really, humans weren't nearly as unique or smart as they liked to think they were. Could the boggets be responsible for Warwick's withdrawal from the area next to Black Nail's territory? Had the creatures attacked Warwick's men, causing them to retreat somewhere safer? No, that probably wouldn't be enough. Black Nail hadn't seen any indication that the boggets here had been a threat to a large group of armed bandits. Except for the village that had been wiped out. Black Nail scratched his nose. He needed more information. Over the next few days, Black Nail sent men out to interrogate everyone that passed by nearby and had scouts head east to look for signs of Warwick's troops. It took a while for him to begin getting information back, but then a picture quickly began to emerge. Warwick had pulled back and was fortifying his own territory. He seemed to no plan to attack Black Nail at all. There were also countless rumors swirling about boggets and demons. People were worried. Hey, what do we do now? Kida asked. Black Nail had called a meeting and all his lieutenants had just gone over the scouts' reports. I have no idea, Black Nail admitted as he scowled sourly. He'd been sure that Warwick would attack him. Isn't this good news? Geralt asked. It means we have more time to establish ourselves. That's what we wanted. But Warwick knows that too, so why is letting us have time? The wolf is ruthless, and never just sits around like a pig in the mud. It makes no sense. It's a stupid-ass thing to do, and he isn't stupid. Geralt shrugged. And yet that is exactly what he's doing. We have confirmation from multiple merchants that have dealt with him directly and some refuges that pass through villages he controls out east. There is no sign that he is planning to move. Then he knows something that we don't, which I don't like much. Black Nail growled in agreement and clenched a fist. This wasn't fair. Sure, this wasn't bad for him strategically, but he wanted action and blood. Now he was going to end up sitting around for months, worrying about what Warwick was up to. He was supposed to be slowly closing the trap on Warwick using a series of clever attacks and daring escapes. Instead, he had no idea what was going on and felt stupid. Not fair. Kida perked up. I know. I could infiltrate his forces as a spy and find out all his secrets. That way we'd know exactly what to do. No, Black Nail replied as Ralphie rolled his eyes. Black Nail didn't care if Kida got herself killed in such an insane scheme, but she knew too much to be put at risk of being captured. What do we do? Just sit here and build up. Geralt had suggested. It wouldn't be a bad plan. Black Nail shook his head. No, we can't do what Warwick thinks we will, or we will lose. He is too smart. We must attack the prey in a way it doesn't expect. So what? Attacking Warwick in his own territory is a terrible idea. He has strong fortifications, knows the area better than us, and outnumbers us by quite a lot. An idea occurred to Black Nail. He hadn't thought it through yet, but it sure sounded fun. We will attack Dagger Point. Twists and turns 5. Why in all the hells would we do that? Ralphie asked as he scowled at Black Nail furiously. Geralt and Kida also looked unconvinced that attacking Dagger Point would be a good idea. Obviously, Black Nail needed to better educate the humans about why they were so wrong. We need to attack something, and it's there. He won't be defending it, the hobgoblin explained, as if it wasn't obvious. There is a good reason for that. He doesn't technically own it, Geralt had pointed out. He has more troops there than anyone else and everyone else has to do what he says. He owns it, Black Nail countered. That's not really true, and attacking people who technically don't work for Warwick will make you enemies. You're supposed to be trying to separate them from Warwick. They all work for him, even if they pretend they don't, like little cowards. They think that makes them safe, but I'll show them it doesn't. Ralphie grimaced. We wouldn't be able to seize the city, let alone hold it. We don't have enough men to deal with so many civilians and so many buildings where hostiles could hide. Your hobs also would make a terrible garrison. That wouldn't work at all. We'd have revolts before the first day was over. So, we raid them and leave before Warwick even hears about it. Lots of loot there we could win. But it's all hidden away or in the hands of organized cutthroats. We'd lose a lot of troops if we let them loose to loot. I'm the boss here, and I think it's a good idea. It would be impressive, Black Nail told them defensively. It would make everyone reconsider how much of a threat you were, and thus their own loyalty to Warwick, Geralt had admitted. Ralphie shook his head. That's not really enough payoff for something so risky. I have a lot of hobs sitting around not doing anything. I can't just wait here for Warwick to move next year. That would be more boring than watching food get moldy. Black Nail's human followers raised a few more objections, but he'd already stopped listening and quickly dismissed them. He was the leader, so they had to do what he said. If they didn't agree, they were wrong. Of course, his decision had a cost, more work. Ugh. All his troops now had to be marshaled and made ready to move. Black Nail decided put that off until tomorrow. It was already starting to get late and he was getting hungry again. His first supper of the night ought to settle his stomach, so he headed over to the kitchen to see what was left in the pantry. He hoped there was pie. However, just as he'd found some morsels that smelled tempting, a hobgoblin messenger burst through his front door and began yelling for him. Sighing, Black Nail put down the food and yelled for the hobgoblin to shut up. He then went to see what the hob wanted. This had better not delay his plan to attack Dagger Point. When he saw Black Nail, the hob immediately began blabbering and waving his arms around. Boss, the enemy is coming. There's an army. A human army is almost here. Black Nail eyed the hysterical hobgoblin. Was it possible he'd eaten some bad food, gotten delirious, and was seeing things that weren't there? That happened sometimes. None of the other scouts he had watching Warwick's territory had seen any sign of movement and a human army would be hard to miss. They weren't all that stealthy. Where is it and how do you know about it? Black Nail asked his minions skeptically. That was when another pair of hobgoblins ran up to the door and began shouting about a human army that had been sighted by the scouts. It was still possible some bad food was going around, but unfortunately, the army was probably real. A little worried now, Black Nail grilled his minions for details, and soon a picture emerged. The army was coming from the south, and although it was small, it didn't sound like Warwick's normal troops. The force comprised about 100 men, all of which were mounted. They were also carrying banners and wore a lot of shiny armor, but the hobgoblin scouts hadn't recognized the banners. That wasn't a surprise, since most the hobgoblins had transformed less than a year ago and had never been outside Black Nail's territory. Of course, Black Nail had no idea what to make of it either. Did Warwick have so much money that he was able to hire a host of well-equipped mercenaries? However, if that was the case, why not move to support them? Confused, Black Nail quickly sent his minions to assemble his lieutenants. Despite its small size, this approaching force was still dangerous, and Black Nail didn't like it when humans began acting oddly. Usually, they were very predictable creatures and lovely prey. Ralphie and Geralt had arrived quickly and joined him outside the home's door. Kida came a moment later, but Black Nail ignored her. No, it doesn't sound like a mercenary force, Ralphie remarked as he scratched his hairy chin. They field mostly infantry, since proper military horses cost so much to feed and care for. Sometimes they'll have some mounted knights in charge, but it's never most the company. Geralt nodded in agreement. Judging by those banners and the description of those riders, I'd say it's a noble's levy of household knights. What does that mean? Black Nail asked them. Kida grinned snidely. It means you won't be heading to Dagger Point anytime soon. Black Nail ignored the obnoxious redhead. She wasn't funny and her opinion didn't matter. I have no idea what brought this on, Geralt admitted. It's more than little strange to tell you the truth. We're far from the lands of any noble, and they have no reason to be interested in us. Undoubtedly, they have no shortage of problems to distract them back closer to home. You know, peasants to draft and send to the king for slaughter and such. Could they be Warwick's allies? Ralphie asked. They're a little outnumbered. Why wouldn't Warwick come along and help them? Kida pointed out. Ralphie scrunched his face up so he looked confused. Then maybe they are just here to fight Black Nail, since he's a hobgoblin and a menace. Nobles get all, noble sometimes. Unsure, Black Nail turned to look at Geralt. He had nothing to add. He was a menace, a great one. The best. Geralt looked uncertain. So, they are looking for us, but don't know how outnumbered they are? That's a weirdly benevolent motivation for a country noble in these hard times. Not to mention, it's highly risky with no reward even if he wins. If whoever this is had the troops to claim these lands, they would have done it a long time ago. Kida scowled and nodded enthusiastically. Yay, those blue bloods stick to their fancy towers and mansions except when they want blood or coin from their folk. It seemed like none of his humans had answers for Black Nail. He needed better humans, or at least more of them. The problem with that was that humans needed a lot of care, so having too many was a chore. They were always wandering off and getting themselves in trouble, like being eaten by forest beasts. We'll assume they are coming to fight us. So, we'll have to be smart and prepare instead of going to Dagger Point right away, the hobgoblin chieftain said as he ignored Kida's chuckle. We'll fortify the town, but we'll also make some plans to retreat into the green and regroup if they take the gate. There are some animal trails there that are too small for those big horses, and I don't want to fight knights head-on. Black Nail had fought the shiny human riders before, when he'd been one of Herod's minions. He wasn't eager to repeat the experience, and he didn't have any illusions about how his hobs would fare against a charge. Stupid foul horses. Someone should poison them all. Ralphie quickly agreed that Black Nail's plan sounded like the best thing to do, and the others bowed to his greater experience with such matters. He was the only one of them that had been an actual soldier. Since the enemy was mounted and Black Nail's forces were occupying a walled town, holding the gate was the priority. Work crews had already repaired it, mostly, but Black Nail quickly dispatched more minions to reinforce it. Wagons and junk could be piled behind the gates to prevent them from being easily opened. Black Nail also had archers and a group of spearmen hide out in the forest near the road. If the enemy became bogged down or managed to get through the gates, they could assault them from behind. If nothing else, they would be a great distraction. Soon, the town of Aldhara thrummed with activity as hobgoblins ran around in every direction. Black Nail had taken up position in the town square and was yelling at everyone to move faster. They were all a bunch of slow slackers and there was a lot to do before the enemy arrived. Several hours passed this way, and Black Nail's minions got their tasks accomplished, mostly because of Black Nail's wonderful ability to give great motivational speeches while chasing them around with his sword. Only one hobgoblin was seriously injured this way, and that had been an accident. Despite that small setback, when the enemy arrived, Black Nail was ready for them. He had plenty of warning from his scouts and was able to observe from the watchtower near the gate. Hera and Geralt were with him, while Gob and Ralphie were down below with the troops. 2 of the supply wagons, piles of crates, and more than a few barrels had been piled behind the gate, sealing it shut. Most of Black Nail's troops were lined up behind the walls, where the enemy cavalry couldn't charge them. He had a few troops out in the forest and there were a few back ways into the town that would be very hard for massed cavalry to use. As Black Nail peered out over the wall, the forefront of the enemy came into sight. They rode around a bend in the road off in the distance and appeared from out behind the green expanse of trees. A column of riders moving at a quick pace, with dust billowing out behind them. Even from so far away, Black Nail's eyes caught glimpses of the armor they were wearing. The metal gleamed when it caught the sun. A few seconds later, as the stream of horsemen grew larger, the first of their banners came into sight. The flapping length of cloth was mounted on a tall spear and pictured a golden crown on a blue field. "Hey, that's the royal heraldry," Geralt remarked in surprise. "That means this group of riders is acting under the authority of the king himself. It's missing the red rose though, so none of the royal family are actually present. So, these are the big human boss guys," Black Nail mused thoughtfully as if he was deep in thought. He had no idea what that meant. He'd never really understood how the whole human king thing worked. All the humans seemed to do what they wanted regardless. Like with hobgoblins, the person giving the orders was usually the one who had the most fighters available to back him. Fancy metal hats were nice, but gave very little in the way of actual authority. Geralt had sighed. Perhaps. There are several groups that can act with the authority of the king. It's complicated. All it really tells us is that this group doesn't belong to an ambitious border noble, it's been organized by someone in the capital and thus has far more authority than a backwoods lord could ever hope for. But we're not in the southern king's territory, we're in mine. I took it, nice and fair, by conquest, Black Nail reminded his human minion as he glared at the flag. The entire force of horsemen had emerged from behind the trees now, and their vanguard was much closer than before. Behind the royal banner, Black Nail saw another one bearing a stag that he recognized as belonging to a local noble. Why didn't Black Nail have a flag? What would he put on it? As the enemy approached, the thunder-like sound of hundreds of horse hooves hitting the ground filled the air. It was intimidating, and Black Nail felt himself begin to grow nervous and sweaty. It looked like there were just over 100 enemies, which wasn't all that many, but their mounts were rather large, so at first glance they looked quite numerous and dangerous. They certainly filled up a lot of space. The sound of bugles rang out, and a moment later, the riders slowed. Black Nail watched as they slowly came to stop just out of bow range of the town's walls. It seemed like they weren't going to attack right away, and since they were human, that meant they probably wanted to talk. If nothing else, they'd want to brag and yell a lot before getting down to the fighting. Black Nail could understand that. Several of the horsemen near the front of the line broke ranks and gathered together. They were too far away for Black Nail to hear, but they were obviously talking about something, and it took them a while. It wasn't until almost a quarter of an hour later that they stopped. Then, 2 of the riders advanced to the front and dismounted. Black Nail studied them as they began walking toward the gate. One was a tall knight in very shiny armor, while the other was wearing a long brown robe. The knight's face was concealed by his helm, but the man in the robe was bald and clean-shaven. He had the look of a priest, who were a type of human Black Nail usually found quite annoying. They talked a lot even for humans, and they were always going on about things you shouldn't do. Black Nail did whatever he wanted. After walking about halfway to the gate, the pair stopped and conversed for a moment. The tall knight then turned to the town's walls and began yelling in an oddly familiar voice. "Hail the town! We come in peace to parley. We seek the one named Black Nail, and we've been told he occupies this town." This was unexpected. If they weren't here to fight, why were they here? Maybe this was just part of the usual bragging and yelling? Black Nail turned to look at Geralt, but the man just shrugged unhelpfully. "Go out and talk to them," Black Nail ordered the man. That's what he got for being so useless. "Why me?" "They want you." "Exactly, so let's not give them what they want yet, in case it's bad. Besides, you're smart about human stuff. You'll be able to tell me more if you meet them," Black Nail explained. Humans were generally better behaved with other humans, since they were pack animals. Sighing, Geralt did as he was told and began climbing down the ladder that led up to the watchtower. He then hustled over the gate, which could still be opened enough for him to squeeze through after some of the junk around it had been shifted. Black Nail watched as Geralt headed out to meet the 2 human spokesmen. He really hoped he wasn't about to be killed horribly. That would make Black Nail sad. Once he'd reached the intruders, Geralt began waving his hands around and yelling. The priest-like fellow immediately began waving his hands and yelling right back, but the knight remained calm and no one attacked each other. Several minutes passed this way, and then Geralt turned around and headed back through the gate, while the 2 visitors stayed behind. Black Nail climbed down to talk to him. "What did they say?" Black Nail asked him once they met. They said they had been sent by the King's Council to meet with you and make a judgment in the King's name. Other than that, not much. I tried getting more out of them, but they remained tight-lipped. They said they'd only talk to you, and that it was of the utmost importance. I also noticed something. Judging by the knight's armor, I'm certain he is a paladin of a religious order. They fight monsters, don't they? Instead of other people, like everyone else, Black Nail remarked. He'd run into a paladin before, way back. Broadly, yes. The paladins are supported by not only the southern kings and the cults, but the mage guilds as well. They're all sworn to seek out and destroy inhuman evil and to withhold themselves from the disputes of men. All full members are also vessels and warriors of some renown. Alright, let's see what they have to say. It should be interesting, Black Nail said before nodding and beginning to walk over to the gate. Geralt hurried over to his side. What? You're just going to go out there? Yes, Black Nail replied as he squeezed through the gate. He was curious now, and he had some idea of who he was dealing with. As Geralt followed him like a good minion, Black Nail calmly walked out of the town and over to the waiting humans. The armored knight was about the same height as him and would be a difficult opponent to fight since he was a vessel, but Black Nail wasn't too worried. The paladin raised a hand in greeting as the hobgoblin mutant approached. It was an oddly polite greeting, considering the armored war host behind the tough-looking man. The knight then pulled his helmet off, revealing a face Black Nail recognized and been expecting. Greeting. The gods have brought us together again, Black Nail the hobgoblin. Twists and turns 6. Black Nail faced the paladin. Yes, hello. I remember you. You're Grimacing, Black Nail tried to think of the man's name. This was a bit embarrassing. He knew this human, but he'd met too many humans to remember all their weird human names, and most of them looked the same. Really, the most memorable thing about an individual human was the uniquely bad smell every one of them had. If you've forgotten, my name and title is Sir Masnan, and I have the honor and responsibility of being a paladin in service of the Order of Heliolustria, the knight replied humbly and without any sign of anger. First, let me offer my condolences. I was genuinely saddened to hear of your mistress' death. She was a woman of strength and determination. Despite how much time had passed, Black Nail felt a twisting surge of grief and anger well up within him at the reference to Herod's death. However, he quickly suppressed the feeling and gave the man a polite nod. Stabbing a random guy wouldn't be constructive. Thank you, but don't worry. I'll kill all her enemies for her. The paladin winced visibly. Perhaps, that's not the wisest course. Maybe you could honor her memory better by serving a greater good. Black Nail smirked and gave the paladin an amused look. There was no way he actually believed that. He'd met Herod. The paladin sighed. I suppose not. Forget I said that. Anyway, thank you for coming to see me. I was afraid you'd avoid me, so let me reassure you that I have not come to seek battle or to slay you. Black Nail decided to get right to the point. He wasn't one for small talk. So, why are you here if you don't want to kill me? You're a paladin, and I'm the worst inhuman around here. The paladin turned to glance at the priest. They shared a grave look and then he faced Black Nail again. Word of your deeds has reached many ears to the south, and in Eloria in particular. Thus, due to my familiarity with you, I have been sent to make contact and appraise your behavior and reasonableness. Why do they care about me? They're very far away, Black Nail asked as he tilted his head to the side in an inquisitive manner. Certain events to the south have made the ruling council nervous. They want reassurances and some sort of agreement to secure their northern flank if possible. Your explanation of your mission and the proceedings that made it necessary seem a little vague to me, Geralt had interjected. What are these ominous certain events that you are speaking of? Sir Masnan glanced at him as the priest frowned. Unfortunately, that's all I'm allowed to share for now. Only after you have been deemed trustworthy can I speak freely on such matters. Black Nail immediately had one important question. What about Warwick? I can answer that question, the priest replied. The crown has also been in contact with the wolf. And who are you? Black Nail asked. My name is Father Jamitel. A high priest of Azawaj. Things were beginning to make more sense now. Black Nail eyed his two visitors suspiciously. Obviously, Warwick's strange actions had something to do with this, and Black Nail wanted to know what. How do you plan on knowing if I'm trustworthy? You humans aren't always great at observing. I'm already pleasantly surprised. You certainly seem far different from a normal hobgoblin. Yes, you actually have a solid command of our language, and you're certainly bigger than any hobgoblin I've ever heard of. Black Nail resisted the urge to roll his eyes. He doubted this priest had ever seen a hobgoblin before, let alone tried to talk to one. They were rare down south and tended to avoid people, for obvious reasons. Also, his skull hadn't been bashed in by a rock. Feral hobgoblins weren't exactly friendly. The priest continued speaking. As for the next step, we would like to inspect this town you've taken. Why? So we can judge how you treat humans you've begun to rule over. Fine, as long as you two come in alone. Black Nail sighed. He wasn't sure what they were looking for, but he wasn't worried about them deciding he'd treated the town too badly, and he could keep most his troops out of sight. Oddly enough, compared to most human bandits, he was almost harmless. Black Nail had also heard a lot about all the atrocities that human nobles regularly committed. The priest bristled. We would need at least a small guard. Black Nail pointed at Sir Masnan. He's already a big guard, and a vessel too. The priest didn't really have a rejoinder for that, so he eventually accepted the hobgoblin's conditions. When that was done, Black Nail sent a messenger inside with orders for his troops. Some of them were to move out of sight of the path through the town that Black Nail intended to take his visitors along. This didn't seem like a trick, but there was no point in allowing them to count his troops. Also, most the horsemen had dismounted and were resting after their journey, so there would be plenty of warning if they decided to charge the gate for some reason. Thus, a few minutes later, Black Nail led the paladin and the priest into Aldhera. Sir Masnin in his bulky armor had a little trouble squeezing through the barricaded gate, but a helpful shove from Black Nail got him through. Once inside, both the visitors stopped to study the two formations of troops Black Nail had left nearby to guard the gate. There was a unit of about 50 human bandits led by Ralphie and a similar-sized unit of hobgoblin spearmen led by Gob. Both the groups were formed up into orderly ranks, but it was the hobgoblins that drew the visitors' attention. To hear about it is one thing, to see it is another. Unbelievable, the priest muttered. Sir Masnin nodded. Even for me, this is the first time seeing more than one hobgoblin in a place. They almost don't seem like the same creatures. Hobgoblins in formation. My mind refuses to accept what my eyes are showing it. Black Nail smiled proudly. They do whatever I say. I beat sense into them after they transform from goblins, and they all know where the good food comes from. Those spears aren't military issue, so you didn't loot them. Where did you get them from? Sir Masnin asked. Black Nail shrugged. Some of my minions make them. We have forges and stuff. The paladin's eyes widened slightly. I see. They certainly look sharp, if a little crude, the priest added after taking a brief look. He seemed far less impressed than the knight. Next, Black Nail took them to the town square near the center of the settlement. As they walked, they even saw a few townsfolk that were going about their business. Since Black Nail had taken over, they'd remained skittish, but they couldn't hide inside all the time. They had jobs to do and lives to live. Both the paladin and the priest asked Geralt several questions about the route of Warwick's forces, and Geralt answered as diplomatically as he could. Black Nail let him handle that, since dealing with other stuck-up fancy people was what he did best. Sir Masnin seemed pleased that Black Nail had killed very few of the townsfolk, although it was a good thing he hadn't asked about looting. Black Nail had to give Geralt credit for how he handled the conversation. He'd also been right about how to deal with the resistance. Not executing a whole bunch of people without trial had paid off. While they were walking, Sir Masnin stared at some of the houses and then turned to Geralt. Has there been any sign of the dread plague in these parts? No, not at all. Why do you ask? Geralt replied as he blinked in surprise at the abrupt question. The knight shrugged stiffly and looked away. I was simply curious. This part of the world has seen much turmoil, which is a fallow bed for the plague to grow upon. Cleansing such taints is one of my holy duties. Black Nail eyed the paladin discreetly. His explanation made sense, but the hobgoblin felt he was hiding something. Sir Masnin wasn't a great liar. I'd like to see the local temples, Jamitel told them once they'd reached the town square and looked around. Sure, Black Nail told him. That seemed like a harmless request. Geralt will lead the way. Geralt frowned. Actually, I don't know the way either, or even if there is a temple to any of the gods in Aldhera. There probably is, but I haven't seen it. This left them very little choice but to ask someone for directions, but they soon got themselves sorted out and headed in the right direction. It didn't take them all that long to get to their destination, a converted home with large double doors on a residential street. If it wasn't for the large symbol hanging above the door, it would be almost impossible to tell from a normal house. That explained how the building had been overlooked by everyone. Once there, the Jamitel stepped inside to talk to the local priest, and Sir Masnin followed behind him. That left Black Nail and Geralt alone outside for a moment, giving them some time to conspire. This makes no sense to me. You're a human. Why do you think they are really here? Black Nail asked his lieutenant. Geralt frowned thoughtfully. I'm not sure. I thought the way he mentioned the plague was odd, but I'm not sure what it means, to be honest. It all comes down to the fact that they were sent by the King's Council, and they normally wouldn't concern themselves with the likes of us. Perhaps the war has been rekindled and has turned against them. They might be seeking either mercenaries to fight for them or to secure their northern border with treaties, so they can pull more troops away to the battlefront. Why send a priest and a paladin for that? I have no idea, and that is troublesome. This whole situation smells rather fishy. I can't wrap my head around it, but my rather varied life experiences have given me half-decent intuition, and it's telling me to expect bad news. Lots of bad news. The priest and the paladin stepped back outside a few minutes later, and the priest flashed them a smile. Everything seems in order. I must admit to being slightly worried that you hobgoblins would profane places of worship. Nope, we don't do that, Black Nail told him. At least, he was fairly certain they didn't. He didn't actually know what profane meant. A sudden spark of interest appeared in the priest's eyes as he leaned closer to Black Nail. It was weirdly intimidating. If I may ask, who or what do you worship? Do you follow the imperial gods, or do you have your own? Confused, Black Nail threw a look at Geralt, and the man quickly stepped forward. Goblins seem to have loose belief in natural spirits without any specific god-like entities. Oh? And what do you ask of these spirits? The priest inquired as he turned to the hobgoblin. Black Nail shrugged. We don't ask them for much. That would be silly since they never listen to us. Mostly they give us someone to blame when stuff goes missing or something bad happens. The priest nodded. I see. A very primitive belief system indeed. However, you have been exposed to human religion for quite some time. Do you believe in any of the imperial gods? Yes. Targalt, the watcher in the green, Black Nail replied immediately. Really? Geralt asked in surprise. Clearly, this was news to him. Cedar believed in him, so I do too, Black Nail explained. How could his master be wrong? Besides, the green god had never sounded like anything but a huge spirit to Black Nail, although instead of stealing people's socks, he watched people from the green and whispered on the wind. Black Nail suspected he also responsible for those rustling noises in the woods that Black Nail could never find the source of, but the humans apparently hadn't caught on to that yet. Unaware of Black Nail's thoughts, Jamitel nodded in approval. I'm glad that you've discarded some of your people's primitive superstitions and are learning some of the greater truths that humanity holds. Geralt threw Black Nail a look that he instantly understood. It meant play along and maybe he'll tell us what we want to know. Black Nail had no problem with that. Honestly, the part that had bothered him the most was referring to all goblins as his people. That was a weird thing to even think about. He was just Black Nail. Humans were dumb. The priest made a brief spiel on the nature of the gods. Black Nail just nodded and pretended that he understood, but that appeared to make the man happy. He probably wasn't used to much more from humans either. After that was done, the paladin and the priest walked a few feet and had a brief private conversation before returning. Black Nail had heard everything they said with his amazing ears, but none of it had been important. It certainly seems like you are more than capable of coexisting with humans and forming some sort of pact with the kingdom of Eloria, Jamitel told Black Nail. When I came here, I was half expecting to die in service of my god while trying to preach the edicts to savages. Being eaten by savages would be a terrible way to die. You humans don't taste very good. We have much better food these days, Black Nail muttered. Why did people keep bringing this up? Even starving feral hobgoblins probably didn't leave witnesses, so why were humans so sure hobgoblins wanted to eat them? Geralt quickly coughed to get everyone's attention. We're glad you decided that we're worthy of dealing with honestly. Such a relationship requires trust though, so why don't you tell us why you've really come here? Sir Masnan let out a deep sorrowful sigh. I suppose we should. Although it brings me misery even to think of it. Jamitel nodded and then looked down and mumbled a brief prayer. Everyone else waited for him to finish, which took a moment. When the priest was done, Sir Masnan finally began explaining why he'd unknowingly interrupted Black Nail's attempt to attack Dagger Point. You're probably wondering why a priest and a paladin are here as emissaries of Eloria when we're supposed to independent of them. The answer is simple. We're here to negotiate and seek accord, not only as representatives of a kingdom, but also of all humanity. What it is that supposed to mean? Geralt asked doubtfully. Black Nail understood his confusion. As a member of humanity, he ought to already know. It means that this isn't a political issue between kingdoms or crowns, but one that concerns all of the civilized nations. Which is why I'm here, instead of helping down south, where I'm sorely needed. As a paladin, I'm a perfect representative of severity of the situation and can convey that this goes far beyond the interests of Eloria alone. I serve and protect humanity instead of kings or crowns. Geralt looked slightly dumbfounded now. And what dreadful event has required this to be necessary? A truly great evil has brought me to you, and though it be far distant, its effects will ripple out across all the world. While King Namirius of Eloria was away at war, his country has been subsumed by the Black Plague of undeath. Ghouls and even worse monsters now stalk the streets of almost all the major cities of Eloria. In the entire of record history, we've never seen an outbreak like this. It sprang from nowhere, and every attempt to contain it has failed. Oh, Geralt replied in shock. He suddenly looked a little green, which Black Nail thought was a good look on him. You still haven't explained why you're here talking to us. This doesn't seem like something I can help you with, the hobgoblin pointed out. He was immune to the plague twice over since he is both a hobgoblin and a vessel, but he is still only one warrior. Sir Masnan sighed again. Normally, we would quarantine the cities involved and send vessels in to cleanse them, but we're stretched thin by unexpected eruption in several populated areas and that has been unsuccessful. We suspect that the plague is not spreading naturally. It wasn't me, Black Nail told them. He had lots of witnesses that could tell them he'd never left the north. We know it wasn't you. The plagues is not the only threat we face. There have been many reports of strange black creatures with many legs moving among the infected. Isolated villages have also come under attack by these creatures, although we are still trying to gather more information of their movements. It is difficult to track them. Boggets, Black Nail said as he narrowed his eyes angrily. Maybe now the humans would believe him about how dangerous they were. Twists and turns 7. Sir Masnan nodded. I see you are aware of these creatures. Boggets are an old wives' tale, but I've heard some of the local people call this new threat by that old name. Whatever they are, the creatures are truly twisted and evil. The havoc they have unleashed is unprecedented since the fall of the old empire and the burning of Jakra on the sea. Black Nail gave him a blank look. Sure. Are things really so bad? Geralt asked in surprise. He apparently got the reference. Yes, the plague is decimating the capital and several other cities. Eloria has never faced a crisis such as this, and it may not be alone. We have nothing but rumors so far, but the plague may be hitting other countries as well. It may well be affecting the entire continent. There was a moment of silence as all the humans shared a moment of dreadful reflection. They looked down and some of them murmured prayers. Black Nail joined in, since he didn't know what else to do. Really, this seemed like someone else's problem. After a few seconds had passed, Sir Masnan looked up. The creatures do appear to be less of a problem in this area though. It's strange. If anything, there have been less attacks on isolated villages, yet these bandits appear to dwell in the wild places, and there is no shortage of that out here in the north. Black Nail grinned proudly and stood up straighter. Ha, that's because I chased them away and cut them into tiny black bits. They were bothering my hunters and miners, so I tracked them back to their nest and destroyed it. Sir Masnin turned to stare at Bulk Nail with sudden intensity. You've actually fought these creatures and seen their lairs? Yes, I slaughtered hundreds of the creepy bug things in a big battle. There are 3 different types and I've killed them all, Black Nail explained. He was glad a human was finally listening to him about this. This information could be invaluable to my cause. Would you tell me of this battle? Sir Masnin asked with obvious interest. Sure, right after you finish explaining why you're here. What exactly do you want from me? Black Nail told him. We should talk about that first. Despite his own willingness to brag, Black Nail wasn't going to let himself get distracted. If his guests wanted something from him, they had to give him something first. Ah, very well. As you know, we were sent here by the King's Council, who are ruling in his name while he is away at the border. The situation at the capital is quite desperate, and the council realizes that they must resort to desperate measures. With this in mind, they gathered up all the allies they could find. Then, together with the local mage guilds, they came up with a dangerous plan. And this plan somehow involves both the North and our humble selves in some manner. Geralt inquired. The priest nodded. Yes, the chances of success go up if we can secure the cooperation of the northern bandit lords. However, we weren't informed of all the details and a lot of information about this threat is still coming in from distant cities. Now that we've judged you capable and trustworthy, we're simply here to invite you to the meeting where further details on this emergency will be discussed. There, you will meet a representative from the council itself and he will answer your questions. Black Nail put on his best polite face. That's nice, but why would we go out of our way to help you so much? This plan of yours sounds dangerous and I'm not afraid of the plague or bandits. Neither the priest nor the paladin looked surprised by this reply. Sir Masnin simply nodded. Cooperation will not go unrewarded. On top of gold and coin, the council has said they are willing to consider granting helpful northern bandit chiefs official recognition of the dominion they hold and perhaps even peerage. Geralt perked up, but Black Nail was unimpressed. The hobgoblin didn't feel the need to acquire permission from some southern humans for anything, especially ones that were desperate for his help. He did what he wanted. The meeting itself will be held in Redcliffe Castle, along the border. Of course, safe passage and all the courtesies of guests will be granted to you and all your subordinates when you come, even if you choose not to grant us your aid, the priest explained before turning to Geralt. The bounty on your own head has been rescinded as a courtesy by royal decree as well, although your crime is as yet unforgiven. Thank you, I am not ungrateful, Geralt told them as he grinned. Meanwhile, Black Nail was thinking through the implications of everything he'd just been told. This definitely changed things, and it certainly explained Warwick's lack of movement. The wolf was probably busy dealing with bandit attacks on villages in his area and avoiding any outbreaks of plague. He couldn't afford to lead troops after Black Nail. He was also probably preparing for the meeting with the representative of the King's Council. From what Black Nail knew of Warwick's ambitions, there was no way he would pass up a chance for official recognition. So, if Warwick was going to be there, then so would Black Nail. If nothing else, it would be chance to mess with Warwick and insult him in front of other important humans. Fine, I'll go to your meeting, the hobgoblin announced. The priest smiled. That's good to hear. These are dark days, and I hope we can all work together to end this horrid crisis. We'll be going then, Sir Masnin told them. Now that we have your cooperation, I must move on. My duty calls me south, where my blade is sorely needed. I'll be leaving right away too, Black Nail agreed. Really? You're riding out so soon? Not riding, no, but leaving yes. I need to go prevent the plague from spreading to the people here in the north. The paladin nodded solemnly. It is good that you plan on taking care of the small folk in your territory. It says much about the nature of your soul and your ability to rise above your savage origins. Sure, letting the plague spread would hurt and kill a lot people, Black Nail replied. The sick and the dead weren't very useful to him, he much preferred his minions healthy. Also, the paladin had misheard him. Black sensed an opportunity here to easily gain some new land. After all, his territory was any place he could force the inhabitants to admit it was his, and he could be very convincing. Fighting the dread plague is one of the most important duties a paladin fulfills, for the plague can cause untold devastation if it and the ghouls it creates are left unchecked. Black Nail gave the man a toothy smile. Then perhaps there is something you can do to help me fight the plague. After a bit more talking and saying a formal goodbye, the priest and the paladin were escorted out of the town and back to their men outside. The horsemen then got back on their mounts and started to ride away. Black Nail and Geralt had watched from the gate. So, what now? This throws all your plans into chaos. It looks like we won't be going to Dagger Point after all, Ralphie remarked smugly as he walked over. Black Nail just snorted disdainfully. It does no such thing. I'm too smart and my plans are way too good to be ruined by something like this. Really, it's easier and will be faster now, since I'm a genius. So, we're still going to Dagger Point? Geralt asked. Surely, we have more pressing matters to deal with. Nope, that's the most important thing of all. This is the perfect time to conquer Dagger Point, Black Nail replied. It'll be easy, and Warwick won't be able to do a thing about it. He'll look weak and I'll look strong when we meet the council. Ralphie scowled. That's nice, but you still have to actually conquer the city, not just talk about it. We just finished explaining to you why that's next to impossible. You don't have enough troops to hold Dagger Point. Black Nail just gave him a smug grin. Don't worry. I have a plan. This answer didn't satisfy anyone, but Black Nail refused to enlighten them. He was the leader and they had to do what he said. They'd learn his plan as he was putting it into action, mostly because Black Nail wanted to see their faces when they realized how amazing the plan was and how incredibly smart he was. Since Black Nail had already been preparing his troops to move before he was interrupted by Sir Masnin's arrival, it didn't take all that long for him to get an expeditionary force ready. He took about half the troops he had available and left the others behind in Aldhara for now. How do you solve the problem of not having enough troops by taking even less soldiers? Ralphie asked grumpily as they began marching out onto the road. By being as smart as me, Black Nail replied. Also, we will be taking an even smaller force and running ahead. We don't have enough time to wait for everyone. We need to move fast. Of course, Ralphie muttered sourly before walking off. Black Nail's vanguard force was made up of a dozen humans and twice that many hobgoblins. They had to reach Dagger Point as quickly as possible, so they planned on using alternating mounts. The humans took turns riding on half a dozen horses. The hobgoblins also had several boars which were being used as mounts. Black Nail just ran. He was more than fast enough to keep up with all the animals on foot, and he wasn't so sure the boars made good mounts. Even the hobgoblins involved in caring for and training the beasts frequently fell off them, and some of them then got trampled by the beasts' hooves. Yay, running was much easier. The boar trainers were optimistic about being able to eventually work out the flaws in the boars' training so that they'd become better mounts, but Black Nail wasn't. Even moving as quickly as they could, it took a few days to reach Dagger Point. The vanguard quickly left the main body of troops behind though. However, moving so quickly wasn't easy or fun. Everyone began to develop sores and grow tired. They had to sleep on the hard ground next to the forest. There, every outstretched branch looked shadowy and dangerous at night, so it was hard to sleep restfully. Only a skilled watch by hobgoblins kept the beasts of the forest at bay so that they could get any sleep at all. The going was so rough and tiring, Hera didn't bother Black Nail for sex at all. No one talked much either, not even Kita. Over the course of the journey, they also left 2 unconscious hobgoblins in the ditch next to the road. The poor fools had been trampled by the boars after falling off while riding. Hopefully, the main force would pick them up, although Black Nail thought it more likely they'd be carried off by harpies. Once they got close to Dagger Point, the small force began to pass the occasional traveler or merchant headed in the same direction. No one traveled to Dagger Point without being able to protect themselves, as it was a lawless place full of bandits. However, despite that, most the travelers that spotted Black Nail's group immediately fled into the forest. Black Nail regretted not having the time to stop and root through the wares some of them left behind. They were practically gifts, and he was sure some of them had cheese hidden away somewhere. Finally. My ass has never been so sore, Geralt had whined when the gates of Dagger Point came into sight over the hill before them. You should have run with me then, Black Nail told him. As Geralt had threw Black Nail an unamused glare, Ralphie spoke up. So, we're here. Are you going to tell us how you plan to conquer the place with just over 24 men? What exactly is our next move? We're going to walk through the gate, punch anyone who tries to stop us in the face, and then find somewhere to settle down where everyone can find us. I'll leave that up to you since humans are very picky about where they rest and sleep. Fine, whatever. Let's get this over with, Ralphie replied with a sigh as he began riding toward the gate. There were several guards at the gate, but the disheveled men didn't try to stop Black Nail and his minions. Technically, all bandits were welcome inside the city, but most bandits weren't hobgoblins, so the guards had to think about what they were going to do. Apparently, thinking wasn't their strong suit. Several of them went rigid with terror while others broke ranks, dropped their weapons, and fled as fast as their legs could carry them. None of them got in the way though, or tried to close the rickety gate, so Black Nail rode into the city without a problem. Ralphie then took point and led them deeper into the city as the streets in front of them became conspicuously emptier with great speed. Not quite everyone fled, but those residents that remained in sight stood in tight groups and were heavily armed. That was hardly odd behavior for Dagger Point though. The city was full of rival gangs and remorseless killers who were always eyeing each other warily. There was no law in most of the city to stop them if they came to blows. After a few twists and turns down various streets that were lined by rickety buildings, Ralphie led them up the front door of a large alehouse. Jumping off his horse, the large bearded man grumbled loudly to himself and then barged through the front doors without announcing himself. All right, attention everyone. Our crew is taking this dive over. Everyone but the staff should bugger off right now if they know what's good for them, and the staff better stay put if they don't want worse, Ralphie yelled as he entered the building. The first floor of the alehouse was occupied by large wooden tables and a bar. There were also several patrons, who simply stared at Ralphie in confusion at first. However, several hobgoblins walked in behind the bearded man, and they provoked a very different reaction. The sound of gasps and sliding chairs filled the room as the patrons got up and hurried for the back door. Ralphie snorted and pointed at the man behind the bar. Stay. We're buying drinks. The barkeeper hesitated and eyed the back door of the pub longingly, but he didn't try to run. Instead, he simply grimaced and gave Ralphie a reluctant nod. The barkeeps of Dagger Point were used to a lot of weird and dangerous stuff, but this one was clearly near his limit. Grunting in satisfaction, Ralphie strode over to one of the tables and took a seat. Hobgoblins and human bandits quickly followed after him and began occupying tables. Most of the hobgoblins glanced around with amused grins as they imitated their human companions. Only a few of them had ever been in an establishment like this. Black Nail took a seat on the far side of Ralphie's table and the rest of his lieutenants joined him. Ralphie gave his chief an annoyed look but didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he yelled for the barkeep to bring him ale, and when the man brought it over, he focused on drinking. Ignoring the poisonous human liquid, Black Nail simply leaned back and waited. This earned him a few curious glances, but everyone appeared content to take a moment to rest after such a harsh journey. As he had expected, it turned out that Black Nail didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, a messenger arrived. The man was dressed in red, the governor's color, and tepidly stepped through the front door and looked around. The man hesitated and eyed the gathered hobgoblins cautiously before putting on a resolute expression and walking over to Black Nail. The hobgoblin chieftain was hard to miss. He stood more than a head taller than any of the other hobgoblins and he had an impressive crown of antlers. Some of the other hobgoblins had small horns, but nothing like their chieftains. Black Nail knew he looked almost as important and impressive as he actually was, almost. Greetings. I have come with a message from the governor, the man announced as he reached Black Nail's side. Yes, I know. That's why you're wearing so much red and bothering me, Black Nail replied in an amused tone as he eyed the man. The man flinched but then calmed down after realizing Black Nail probably wasn't going to bite him or anything. Yes. He wishes to know what your intentions are in coming to the city. I'd love to talk to him about that. In fact, we should meet face to face as soon as possible, like very soon. I have very important news to share with him. You could just tell me and I'll inform him of anything you wish. Inform him I want to meet him right away. He can come here, or I can start walking to his big fancy house, Black Nail replied. The messenger considered this for a moment and then gave Black Nail a quick bow. He'd apparently decided that this wasn't his problem to solve. I will relay your wishes. Turning around, the messenger then exited back out the front door and disappeared from sight. Over the next hour, Black Nail and his minions lounged in the alehouse and messengers ran back and forth between the hobgoblin chieftain and the governor. The man was reluctant to meet face to face, but Black Nail was stubborn and more than willing to force the man's hand. Thus, the governor eventually conceded and invited Black Nail to his mansion in the central district of Dagger Point. All right, let's go, Black Nail told him minions as he got up out of his chair. All of us? We just sat down, Geralt whined. Yes, I don't trust you to stay out of trouble while I'm gone, the hobgoblin replied. There were groans from many of his human and hobgoblin minions who were enjoying ordering various new drinks and snacks from the now very overworked barkeeper and his two servants, but no one dared disobey. After informing the barkeep that they'd be back soon and to stock more food, Black Nail's group headed back out onto the streets. Moving quickly, the group headed for the center of the city. Soon, they left the markets and dirty alleyways behind. The central district was different from the rest of the city. The homes were larger and better kept, and the streets were far cleaner. The main reason for this was obvious. The governor's men patrolled the central district. Clad in steel helms and breastplates, the guards and patrollers carried short spears. This was the one area that bandits and criminals weren't allowed to run wild. Black Nail and his minions got a lot of mean looks from the guards, but they weren't stopped. Thus, they soon arrived at their destination, a huge mansion with a large yard that was surrounded by a stone wall. The entire grounds was neatly landscaped, and 2 more guards stood outside the entrance. Most of your men should stay out here, one of the guards told Black Nail. The hobgoblin chieftain just nodded and selected Hera, Geralt, Kida, and Ralphie to come with him. Normally, he'd use some excuse to exclude Kida, but he wanted to show off. As the guards moved out of the way, Black Nail and his retinue entered the mansion. There was a large hall full of tasteful ornaments and marble statues on the other side of the door, with a crystal chandelier hanging in the center of everything. It was all very pretty and shiny. Black Nail wanted a chandelier of his own now. What type of human did he need to make one? The governor was also present in the hall. With his trim white beard and distinguished posture, he looked the same as the last time Black Nail had seen him. He also wasn't alone. Several red-clad servants stood behind him, but they weren't important. There was a familiar woman in a long white frilly dress at the governor's side. Luphira gave the hobgoblin an overly friendly and quite suggestive smile. It's so nice to see you again, Black Nail. I must say, you've grown much more rugged looking, and I've been too long without the unique pleasure of your company. Her voice sent a shiver down Black Nail's spine. Ugh, this wasn't part of the plan. Twists and turns 8. Oh, hello, Black Nail told Luphira uncertainly. What had he just walked into? Her unexpected inclusion in this talk had thrown him badly off balance. Regardless of his complicated past with her, the woman's presence meant that this meeting wasn't going to be as simple as he'd hoped it would. Luphira pouted. Really? That's all I get in the way of greeting. Aren't we intimate allies and close friends? Black Nail really didn't know what his relationship with Luphira was. Sure, he'd killed some people for her, but that was nothing special. He killed lots of people, sometimes just because he could. The fact that she'd seduced him once also didn't mean much to him. In fact, he suspected it had all been part of a dastardly scheme to manipulate him. He blamed her perfume for messing with his head. Usually he wasn't attracted to humans, even thinking about it was icky, but that scent had clouded his mind and roused his blood. Cautiously sniffing the air, Black Nail didn't detect Luphira's usual scent. She was wearing a different perfume. No, wait. The mind-altering scent was there, just faint and buried under the other perfume. Black Nail didn't feel it affecting him yet, but he would need to watch himself carefully. Sex doesn't make us friends, and I don't know if we're still allies. Why are you here? The hobgoblin asked the woman. He wasn't going to let his guard down. At his words, both Ralphie and Geralt had winced as if they'd just imagined something they'd rather not. Blacknail didn't understand why. Luphira wasn't bad looking for a human. Just very pink. Luphira just smiled. So cold. I'm here to see you obviously. I wanted to do some catching up with my favorite hobgoblin. It's been rather dull here without you. I like what you've done to yourself by the way. You have a handsome amount of muscle now. Beside Blacknail, Hera had been glaring at Luphira intently. Now, she growled loudly enough that everyone heard her, which earned her a curious glance from Luphira. Oh, I see. A female. I couldn't tell at first, she remarked a moment later as she gave Hera a smirk. It was easy to tell that she found Hera rather unimpressive. Blacknail couldn't help but glance at Hera's body out of the corner of his eye and compare it to Luphira's. The hobgoblin was skinnier, shorter, and had far less curves. She was also wearing far bulkier clothes which were similar to what all male hobgoblins wore. Luphira on the other hand had on a flowing dress that accented her body, and she was wearing expertly applied makeup that wasn't obvious unless you looked for it. Sensing the woman's casual disdain, Hera's glare deepened. Oh, you're a human? I thought a pig had wandered in to be butchered. From somewhere near the back, Kida giggled. Blacknail just grimaced. Should he be saying something here? He really didn't want to though. Getting between the two females seemed like a bad idea. Feisty one, isn't she? Luphira remarked as she glanced at Blacknail. Hera tried to take a step toward Luphira, but Blacknail stretched out his arm to stop her. He couldn't let this come to actual blows. Careful, he told them both. This caused Hera to actually snarl so that her teeth showed, so Blacknail wasn't sure she'd been listening. Luphira just laughed. Ha, I'm not the jealous sort. I simply think she should at least put some effort into cleaning herself up, if only so that she doesn't drag mud across the floor. Not everyone makes their living on their back, Kida huffed not so quietly in support of her friend. Blacknail couldn't help but glance at Hera so that he could compare her to Luphira. They were very different, which wasn't a surprise since they weren't the same species. He found them both attractive, although he was far more comfortable with his desire for Hera. Being with a human was strange to even think about, even if Luphira's curvy body was delightfully soft and bountiful. Blacknail was fairly certain a whole bunch of his instincts were getting messed up when he was around Luphira, and some of them had more to do with hunting than sex. Luckily for her, Luphira could take care of herself and wasn't afraid of taking charge, even if that had embarrassed Blacknail a lot in the past. Ugh, he didn't want to think about. Still, embarrassment aside, Luphira had without a doubt had a huge impact on Blacknail. After being with her, Blacknail had no longer found female goblins attractive at all. They were too small now that he was a hobgoblin, and he was even bigger now. Female hobgoblins were built much more like human women though. He was never going to mention this to anyone, especially not Hera. Since he wasn't deaf and blind, the governor sensed the building tension in the room. Thus, he coughed and stepped forward. The purpose of this meeting is so that Blacknail can inform me of why he's seen fit to visit my city. At her request, I allowed Luphira to join us, but now is not the time for idle chatter. You can dally or claw at each other somewhere else. Neither Luphira or Hera looked at him. Their eyes remained locked on each other. Somewhat off-put by this, Blacknail decided to get this meeting over with as soon as possible. I'm here to save you, he told his host smugly. The governor frowned. Save us? You are the only dangerous element affecting my city at the moment. Your presence threatens to destabilize the balance between the bandits and plunge my city into chaos. If you remain, Warwick's local lieutenant will have to strike against you, and he has the largest force in Dagger Point. I have a bigger one on the way. A spark of anger appeared in the governor's eyes. So, you plan to wage war here? You may outnumber the wolf's men, but all the local bandit troops have sworn themselves to him and would also rise against you. You can't fight them all. Blacknail chuckled. No, I'm not here to fight humans. Like I said, I'm here to save you. From what? Grinning broadly now in a way that showed off his teeth, Blacknail reached into one of his coat pockets and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. He straightened it out and brushed it off a few times before handing it to the governor. The dread plague, Blacknail answered as the man began reading. Luphira looked over his shoulder. They were both visibly paler by the time they'd finished reading. This was amusing. Grimacing as if he was in pain, the governor looked back up at Blacknail. This is real? No, you couldn't have faked these seals. It must be true. I got it from the paladin myself. Everything there is true, Blacknail explained. He'd requested an official letter from Sir Massenon explaining the situation in the south. It also vouched for Blacknail himself, although that part was vague. It was all part of the plan. Luphira looked unusually disturbed and was biting her lip. My sources have reported outbreaks down south, but I had no idea it was this bad. I had assumed rumors were flying wild, especially in regard to these boggots. I thought them figments of peasants' imagination. I can also vouch for the veracity of the letter, Geralt added helpfully. It seems like the situation in Eloria, and possibly elsewhere is quite dire indeed. The governor nodded and turned to Blacknail. Well, I thank you for bringing this to our attention, but I don't believe you came here as any sort of messenger. No, I came to save you from the plague, Blacknail agreed. The boggots are spreading it and must know this city is here. The creatures are smart and have been preparing for a long time. They want all humans dead. I don't imagine your help will come without a cost. Black Nail smiled. Only a very small one. You just have to let my men inside and promise to help them. They will need food and shelter, but they aren't picky like humans. Let in an army of hobgoblins? I don't see how that is necessary. We have our own methods of detecting and dealing with the plague. Hounds and vessels among other things. The southern humans had hounds and vessels, but it wasn't enough. The bandits were able to kill them easily. Also, you have less vessels than you did. Avorlus made all of yours and he works for me now. I had wondered what had happened to him after his disappearance, Lupira remarked. If we did agree to your terms, what of your conflict with the wolf and his forces in the city? The governor asked. Black Nail shrugged. To work, my men would need to be safe from ambushes by Warwick's men. You'll just have to kick all of them out of the city. I don't have the men or the authority to do any such thing. Then get the other bandits and gangs to do it. They will need protection from the plague too. The governor frowned. Perhaps that could work, but this seems like quite a lot to take on faith. You don't need faith at all, Black Nail told him. I'm willing to bet the plague is already in the city, spreading from human to human as we talk. My hobs can track it down within a few hours and show it to you up close. The governor's eyes widened in surprise, and what smelled like more than a little fear. Already? You believe these bandits are already spreading the plague within the city? Yes, there is no reason they wouldn't be. I chased them away from my territory, but Dagger Point isn't in my territory. Yet. Now the governor looked very uncertain and afraid. He hesitated for a moment before saying anything more. Very well. If you find any infection within my city, I will back your plan completely. Lupira chuckled grimly. It's not like you are giving us much choice. It seems we are completely dependent on you now. If the southern lands are truly being ravaged by the ghoul plague and these bandits, we stand little chance on our own. Yep, you need me, Black Nail replied happily as he turned to leave. It would be silly to stick around now that he had the cooperation he needed. Every second he wasted, the plague was spreading further through the dark alleys and ramshackle buildings of Dagger Point. I'll send a man with you, so you can contact me if you find something, the governor called after him. Heading back out the front door, Black Nail and the others met up with the rest of their force on the street. One of the governor's men in red followed them as they headed back to the alehouse they'd just left. It would serve as a fine headquarters from which to begin their search. Who was that woman? Hera asked in a suspicious tone as she walked up right beside Black Nail. Kiddo was right behind her but hung back to listen without actually joining the conversation. Twitching nervously, Black Nail turned to look at her. Just an ally from long ago. She helped me kill someone, so I killed someone for her. Hera pouted. I help you kill lots of people, but you've never killed anyone for me. Is there someone you want me to kill? That's not the point. Black Nail had no idea what the point was. Thus, he deflected. I'll get you a gift. There's lots of nice stuff in this city. This seemed to satisfy Hera for the moment. She smiled happily and nodded, but then Black Nail noticed her turn and glance hostilely back at the governor's mansion. It was obvious what she was thinking. Don't go trying to kill her. I need you with me, and you don't know the city. There are many dangers here and she has a lot of skilled minions, Black Nail told her. Hera sighed in disappointment but nodded reluctantly. She then grabbed Black Nail's arm and pulled him close so that they were walking arm in arm. Normally, Black Nail wouldn't have allowed that, but he knew better than to say anything right now. It was a small price to pay for not getting stabbed in his sleep. Once they'd burst back into the alehouse and startled the barkeep so that he dropped the platter he was carrying, Black Nail had a quick snack and then began organizing the search for the ghouls. It had been quite a while since he'd encountered any of the twisted humans, but he clearly remembered what they were capable of. Images of Herad's fight against them flickered through his mind. The creatures had emerged from the forest at night and charged the bandits' campfires. It was then that Black Nail had first seen Herad go all out. Her blade had reflected the firelight as she'd cut into the ghouls, but it had been a close fight, even for her. Black Nail also clearly remembered what the creatures smelled like. It was a nasty oily smell that was tinted by rot, and yet still very human-like. Forming up several packs of 5 hobs and 1 human minder, Black Nail told them what to look for. He also assured the humans that they weren't supposed to go anywhere near any ghouls. They were simply along to keep the hobs out of trouble and deal with any distractions that came up. The humans were understandably afraid of the dread plague. Not everyone who was infected showed obvious signs, but any exposure to infected body fluids could spread the plague. All the infected also eventually became monstrous ghouls with claws and teeth that could slice into flesh and spread the plague that way. The only known cure was an expensive elixir made from silver. Black Nail himself stayed behind in the alehouse so that his minions could find him once they'd detected the scent of the plague. While he waited, he snacked some more. The barkeep had done as he was told and gotten some more cheese. There were also meat pies. So, who was that flirty lady? You seem to know her quite well, Kida asked as she took a seat next to Black Nail. The hobgoblin chieftain frowned. No one important. Kida huffed in disbelief. As if. Come on, tell me. No, Black Nail replied as he shoved her chair away. Stupid Kida. She was annoying as a bug that had gotten stuck up his nose. Thankfully, Black Nail didn't have to ignore Kida for much longer after that. One of the groups he'd sent out returned to report. We found the scent you were seeking, boss, one of his gobs explained after hurrying over to his master's side. There's a big abandoned building in a place few humans go. It smells exactly like you said. Black Nail put down the rest of the drumstick he'd been eating and got up, Alright, let's get ready then. The others should be getting back soon. All the hunting parties he'd sent out had orders to return every half hour, even if they didn't find anything. To contain a ghoul infection, Black Nail was going to need them all, so he headed outside to wait for them. It took 15 minutes, because one group was late by over 5 minutes. Black Nail didn't have time to punish them though. They had to move fast. Thus, at his command, the hunters who'd found the trail began leading the way into the city. Following behind them, Black Nail took his 24 hobs, Kida, and the messenger in red with him. Kida was immune to the plague because she was a vessel, but any other humans would just be a distraction. They could meet up with him once he'd dealt with the infection. The hunters led Black Nail and the others down several twisting alleyways that ran between the dirty buildings of Dagger Point. There was grime and garbage everywhere, as well as several unconscious drunks and a lot of rats. The drunks didn't move, but the rats scrambled away from the hobs and disappeared into junk or gaps between stones. Several hobgoblins eyed the vermin hungrily. The rats here were fat, but from experience, Black Nail knew they didn't taste great. The lead hunter suddenly stopped and raised a hand to point at a large building up ahead. There, that's where the trail leads and the scent is strongest. Black Nail studied the structure. It was obviously derelict, since it had a huge sagging hole in its roof. Before being abandoned, it looked to have been a workshop of some kind. It had a big central section that was 2 stories tall and several smaller side sections as well. It had probably never been pretty looking, but now it was rather dark and forbidding. Most of the buildings around here weren't in much better shape though. Many of them were abandoned and run down too. Only a few seemed like people ever visited them. This was one of the parts of Dagger Point that had been left to molder after the bandits had taken over. Sniffing the air, Black Nail easily detected the scent of ghouls. The foul oily smell was thick here. Cautiously, Black Nail studied the dank and shadowy alleys that surrounded him. It was possible that there were ghouls hidden all around this area. If he attacked any of them, the others would rise up and attack him from behind. This hunt was going to require careful planning. Despite how they looked, ghouls had dangerous and cunning instincts. The messenger in red was still cowering at the very back of the group, so Black Nail sent him back to his master with a single hobgoblin as an escort. That way the governor would know exactly where the infection was. That done, Black Nail began giving the others orders in a hushed voice. Most the hobs were to stay outside in pairs and make sure no ghouls fled, while Black Nail went in with a few minions to guard his back. I'll stay out here and make sure none of them get away, Kida volunteered. This earned her a look from Black Nail. He'd expected the stupid redhead to insist on joining him. Now that he was paying attention, she did look out of sorts. She was paler than usual, and she kept glancing at all the nearby shadows. What's the matter? He asked her. Ghouls creep me out, the redhead whispered back. I'm also not great haunted buildings. Black Nail frowned. You're immune to the plague now. Sure, but they can still just kill and eat me. I mean, they used to be people, but now their blood is black and they're all starved looking. It's just wrong, she replied with shudder of dread. Fine, stay out here, Black Nail replied with a sigh. Of course, even her fears were stupid. A shuffling noise drew Black Nail's attention, so he glanced over to his left. There, a previously unnoticed figure wearing rags was crouched next to a pile of junk. However, now it had drawn attention by moving to look toward the hobgoblins. At first, Black Nail thought it was a beggar or another drunk, but then he met its gaze. Its eyes were pitch black pools full of shimmering hunger. Slowly, the ghoul began to rise, revealing its long claws and the emaciated body that lay under its filthy rags. A mouth full of twisted teeth and black mucus became visible as it opened its mouth to scream and summon its pack. Twists and turns 9. With every shred of speed he could muster and every bit of magic he could pull out of his core, Black Nail launched himself toward the ghoul. Like a striking snake, his blade flew out of his sheath and sliced through the air toward the ghoul's neck. The creature's mouth was already wide open as it sucked in the air necessary for it to scream and alert its pack. However, just as a shrill screech began to echo out of the ghoul's throat, Black Nail's blade slammed into the side of its neck. The blade cleaved through the deathly pale flesh effortlessly and sent black blood flying as it decapitated the ghoul in one powerful strike. There was a wet plop sound as the ghoul's body fell over, and its head hit the ground a moment later. Black Nail stared at the body for a moment, before looking around for something to clean his blade off with. Ghouls were weird, but he was fairly certain that decapitation killed them, so he wasn't too worried about it getting back up. He really didn't want to leave any black stains on his sword though. Ghoul blood smelled foul, and there was the small matter of it spreading the plague. Good job, boss. You're the fastest ever, Hera congratulated her chief. Black Nail gave her a nod, because she was right. Did you get him in time? Kida asked. She sounded a little shocked. I think so, Black Nail answered as he used a nearby rag to clean his blade. The plan can continue without change. The redhead nodded. Right, so I'm staying out here, away from the haunted building full of ghouls. Whatever. Just make sure you don't let any fleeing ghouls get past you, Black Nail told her before turning to his hob minions and selecting the ones who would be entering the abandoned workshop with him. The building loomed ahead of the group. Its wood was so rotten there was a large gaping hole in the roof, and its stone foundation was stained with dirt and other fouler substances. The windows were all uncovered, but there was nothing but impenetrable darkness to be seen within them. Black Nail thought it was rather inviting and comfy looking. It would have made a great hideout for hobgoblins if it hadn't already been taken by ghouls. Also, he didn't really need a hideout, since he was a glorious leader these days. Mansions were more his thing now. Alright, let's go, Black Nail told Hera and his guards as he started walking toward the building's front door. Behind him, Kida and his other minions began to spread out to form a perimeter around the target. Moving carefully and quietly, Black Nail and his minions approached the entrance to the abandoned workshop. The door had fallen off its hinges long ago, and only a small pile of wooden scrap on the ground was left of it. Black Nail's hobgoblin eyes could pierce the heavy darkness that lay beyond the entrance, but there wasn't much to see, just more rotten wood and shadows. Black Nail moved in complete silence as he stepped through the door and looked around. The building's interior was eerily quiet, even to his sensitive hobgoblin ears. There was a hallway to his left and a vast workshop full of junk to his right. It was hard to make out any details in the dark though. A multitude of ghouls could be hiding nearby. The creatures were stealthy and prone to concealing themselves and sleeping during the day. Although, Black Nail wasn't sure ghouls really slept like normal animals. It was more like they lurked unmoving for long periods of time, conserving their strength as they waited for a chance to strike. Frowning thoughtfully, Black Nail decided to head into the workshop, and ignore the hallway for now. He drew his sword as he began to creep forward, and his guards followed carefully after him. The large room had once contained rows of shelves and lines of tables. Now, all the shelves were broken scrap and most the tables had collapsed. A bit of late afternoon light got in through some small windows on the walls, but not a lot. The room was very dark and shadowy, and the remains of machinery had been piled up in one corner. Thus, there were plenty of places where ghouls could be hiding. As Black Nail moved further into the room, he had to move very cautiously. The floor beneath his feet was rotten and weak. Not only was there the danger of making a loud noise, but it wasn't impossible that placing his foot in the wrong spot would send him falling down through a new hole in the floor. Black Nail's magical senses weren't registering the presence of anything alive. They weren't the most consistent way to find enemies, but they usually gave him at least a little warning that he wasn't alone. Black Nail was sure there were ghouls here though. He could smell them for one thing. Their corrupt oily stench filled the air. Ghouls probably didn't trigger his magical senses because they didn't feel fear. Black Nail thought this was because their brains were so rotten. Any part of their mind that didn't help them spread their foul infection was long gone. Unfortunately, not all of Black Nail's minions were masters of stealth like him. After the group had made it about 12 feet into the room, a misplaced foot by one of the hobgoblins made the floor creak loudly. Black Nail froze and glanced back over his shoulder. All of his minions had frozen as well. It wasn't clear who had messed up and made the noise, so Black Nail gave them all an angry glare before turning to scan his gloomy surroundings. Had they given themselves away? At first, Black Nail detected no change in the environment. Everything was still. Then, his ears twitched as a subtle new sound reached them. It was very quiet, but it was there. Black Nail heard the rustling of cloth and something scrapping against wood. Even worse, it wasn't all coming from the same direction. Several similar noises were coming from all around the workshop. Resolved, Black Nail raised his blade and peered around the gloomy room. He was no human, so he feared neither the darkness nor the touch of ghouls. Hobgoblins such as him were predators and the shadows were their home. These ghouls were rivals and were trying to prey on humans that belonged to him. Suddenly, all at once, 4 figures rose up from out of sight and turned toward Black Nail. Their features were difficult to make out in the darkness, but their bodies were thin, and their clothes were ragged. Ghouls. The unnatural creatures seemed to study Black Nail for a moment, and then they all screeched simultaneously and threw themselves at him. Kill them all. Hack them to bits. Black Nail roared as he planted his feet on solid parts of the floor and got ready to meet his attackers. Even as the first few ghouls closed in, Black Nail could hear other ghouls begin to move in other parts of the workshop. Soon, they would all flood into this room as well. A ghoul in stained rags hissed furiously as it threw itself at Black Nail. It reached out to gore him with its jagged claws, which were caked in grime. Unimpressed, Black Nail cut the creature's arm right off with a swing of his sword and then kicked it in the chest, sending it flying backward. However, almost immediately, 2 more ghouls attacked him, and these ones were armed. One swung at him with a long club made from broken wood and the other had a rusty axe that looked like it had once been used to cut firewood. At the same time, Black Nail could hear several of his minions shout from behind him as more ghouls engaged them. Lashing out, Black Nail sliced the rusty axe being swung at his chest in half with his blade. He then ducked under the club, brought his weapon around, and gutted the ghoul holding the broken axe shaft. Black oily entrails spilled out of the ghoul as it screamed furiously and fell over sideways. Black Nail's blow had cut deep enough to damage the creature's spine, but it didn't sound in pain, just very angry. The ghoul with the club swung at Black Nail again, but the hobgoblin chieftain blocked the blow and then punched the monster in the face. Its head snapped back from the impact, but it recovered almost instantly. Dropping its club, it lunged at Black Nail with both of its claws outstretched. Even a magic-empowered blow to the head from a mutant wasn't enough to overcome the ghoul's immunity to pain and shock. The ghoul was in too close for Black Nail to hit him with his sword, so he let his blade fall. At the same time, he reached down to his waist with one hand and drew a dagger. Stepping to the side and away from the ghoul's sharp claws, Black Nail then jammed the dagger up through the bottom of the ghoul's jaw and into its brain. Despite the way the transformation into a ghoul twisted a human's flesh and fingers, their bones were basically the same and had the same weaknesses. Glancing back, Black Nail saw that his minions were holding their own against half a dozen ghouls that were trying to overrun them. Hera in particular was fighting viciously to hold her ground. As he watched, she savagely hacked apart a ghoul that tried to jump on her. It was good thing Black Nail had trained his minions so well. Black Nail didn't have time to watch other people's fights for long though. 2 more hideous ghouls emerged from a side room and charged him. One of these new assailants was actually clutching a pitchfork. They hissed as they threw themselves forward, so Black Nail hissed right back, before swinging his sword with such force that it sent the pitchfork flying away. That didn't deter the ghouls, so Black Nail stabbed one of them in the gut. His blade sank deep, but then he realized his mistake. That would have been a killing blow against a human or hob, but the ghoul simply ignored the blade lodged in its stomach and tried to claw at Black Nail. Grunting, Black Nail kicked the ghoul away, which deprived him of his own weapon. That gave plenty of time for the second ghoul to throw himself atop the hobgoblin. Black Nail felt claws rake across his coat and the unprotected back of his head, drawing blood. Thankfully, it felt like the ghoul's claw had gotten entangled in Black Nail's horns before they could do too much damage. Although the hot rage of battle was burning within Black Nail, the wound still hurt, enflaming the hobgoblin more. Roaring in fury, Black Nail grabbed the offending ghoul and slammed him into the floor. There was a crack from the rotten wood, but that didn't stop Black Nail from following up his throw with a powerful stomp to the ghoul's head. There was a louder crack as the force of the blow drove the ghoul's skull right through the rotten floorboards. The creature also stopped moving. It looked like the hobgoblin had broken its neck. Still angry and looking to take his wrath out on his enemies, Black Nail stepped over to the ghoul which had his blade stuck in it. He gave it several heavy kicks that cracked bones, and then ripped his blade out of the creature's gut and decapitated it. That done, Black Nail turned and went to the aid of his allies. Although there were a lot of dead ghouls surrounding them, the hobgoblins were still fighting over half a dozen of the creatures. More ghouls had swarmed in from other areas of the workshop to join the fight as it dragged on, and despite the ease with which Black Nail had dispatched them, ghouls were not easy opponents. The creatures attacked without any regard for their own safety and had no mercy. They also had startling speed and strength to match that of the most dangerous humans. Most dangerous of all though, they completely ignored any wound that didn't outright kill them. Their only weaknesses were their lack of martial skill and inability to make complex plans. Even ghouls that had once been warriors seemed to lose their weapon skills, even if they could still wave around simple tools. Black Nail could understand how these things were such a threat to human cities. If his minions hadn't been immune to the creature's infection, this fight would have been a nightmare. Hera was warding off two unarmed ghouls with her sword, so Black Nail stepped forward and struck down one of them down with a sword slash to the chest that knocked the creature sideways and ripped open its ribcage. This gave Hera a chance to finish off the other ghoul with a series of quick slices that disabled its limbs and then tore its throat open. After that, the hobgoblins began eliminating the ghouls one by one with their chieftain's help. The last two tried to disengage and run back into the shadows, but Black Nail bounded after them and cut them down from behind before they got far. "What now, boss?" Hera asked when the last ghoul stopped moving. Black Nail grunted and looked around. "Now, I think the humans are going to have to burn this entire building down. They'd sort of gotten black blood everywhere and that stuff stained. The hob's clothes would also probably need to be burned too. Oh well, some considerate humans had probably left some clothes around somewhere. I meant, what should we do next?" Black Nail thought about that for a moment. "We should do some exploring before the governor gets here. I want to see the basement." "You think there will be more ghouls?" Hera asked. Black Nail shook his head. "Something else." A quick exploration of the rest of the building revealed the stairs leading to the basement. They were behind a door in a back hallway. Black Nail and his minions stood at the top and stared down into pitch-black darkness at the bottom. "So, did anyone bring a light?" Black Nail asked his hobs. There was a quick chorus of NOS. Black Nail sighed. He really needed to remember to get better minions that would remember this sort of stuff. This wasn't the first time this had happened. Since Black Nail didn't really want to go down into the basement without a light, he decided to station some guards outside it and head back outside to wait for the humans. Hopefully, they would bring a lamp or something. This proved to be a good idea, because when Black Nail left the workshop and found Kita, she was standing next to several men in the governor's colors, and two of them were holding lanterns, probably because it was getting dark out. Apparently, the governor moved quickly and efficiently when ghoul infestations were involved. Only one ghoul tried to escape, and some of your hobs got it. They're standing guard over its body now, Kita yelled his way when she saw him. "Good, we're almost done inside." All the guards in red tensed as Black Nail approached, but he ignored it and held out a hand toward the nearest one. "Give me your lantern." The man froze from fear instead of replying, which annoyed Black Nail. He didn't have time for all this constant human stupidity. Kita was also apparently very unimpressed. "Geez, what a coward," she announced as she reached out to grab the lantern from the man's hand. Once she had it, the redhead handed the lantern to Black Nail, who immediately took it. The hobgoblin then gave her a grateful nod and hurried back to the stairs inside. It was nice to be reminded that there actually were more useless humans than Kita. It was hard to imagine, but he could have been stuck with someone worse. As Black Nail arrived back at the stairs, his hobs gave him a bunch of mistimed salutes. That was a little random, but whatever. "Come down after me," he told them as he held the lit lamp up with one hand and drew his sword with the other. "At your order, boss," one of the hobgoblins answered. "I'll never leave you," Hera added. Black Nail chose not to dwell too much on her choice of wording. The old wooden stairs creaked ominously as the hobgoblin descended. His lantern pushed back the darkness, revealing grimy walls made of loose stones and disintegrating mortar. The floor was packed dirt and there was rubble everywhere. There were also lots of cobwebs. Idly, Black Nail wondered if they were made by the crunchy type of spider or the poisonous type. It was important to know the difference if you didn't want your tongue inflating to 3 times its normal size. There was more creaking from the stairs as Black Nail's minions and Hera descended to join their chief. Black Nail quickly glanced their way before turning back around. Most of the rubble in the basement wasn't nearly big enough to hide a ghoul, no matter how sneaky they were. Black Nail also checked the ceiling, just in case, but there were no ghouls hanging up there either. There were footprints in the dirt, but it seemed like all the ghouls that had been hiding down here had come up during the fighting. Black Nail wasn't here to look for ghouls though. Lifting his lantern high, he began to walk around the room and inspect the walls. He soon found what he was looking for, a spot where the dirt was very loose, as if it had recently been dug up. After taking a moment to sniff the air, Black Nail handed his sword to one of his minions to hold, and then dug up the dirt a little. It soon became obvious that something had tunneled in under this wall, so Black Nail stopped playing around in the dirt and instead kicked the bottom of the wall as hard as he could. The stones gave way and collapsed outwards, to reveal a hidden passage. Black Nail kept kicking, and soon the entrance had been widened to the full size of the passage beyond it. The newly discovered tunnel was wide and tall enough for a man or a hobgoblin to walk through, and it seemed to have been dug through the dirt. It didn't look natural though, the walls were too regular. What dug this? It doesn't look like human work, one of Black Nail's minions asked as he peered past his chief. Black Nail didn't need to answer him. Instead, there was a familiar hiss from the darkness of the tunnel and the shadows began to shift. A moment later, a swarm of angry boggats emerged from the darkness and threw themselves at the hobgoblins. Twists and turns 10. The boggart workers swarmed out of the dark tunnel and into the abandoned building's basement. Black Nail stepped forward to try to hold them back, but although he managed to cut 2 of them down, the rest pushed him back with the weight of their armored bodies. Behind Black Nail, his minions quickly stepped up to join their leader, and together they formed a combat line that met the boggats head-on. The hob holding the lamp was the only one that fell back, since they all needed that light to see. Lashing out with his blade, Black Nail mangled a worker and then skewered another. His forces were managing to hold their ground, and this limited the number of boggats that could swarm out of the tunnel. The creatures were tightly packed though, and they didn't hesitate to climb over one another as they threw themselves at the hobgoblins. Boggart after boggart was slain, but their attack didn't relent. Obviously, there was a large number of the creatures in dagger point. Black Nail had expected that, since he'd heard that the creatures had been attacking anyone who tried to hunt or quarantine ghouls in the south. Thus, Black Nail had decided to beat them to the punch and hunt them down first. A boggart managed to lunge forward and bite Black Nail's ankle. The hobgoblin chieftain suppressed a screech of pain, and violently stomped the creature's head until its skull shattered. Yes, this was all going according to plan. Mostly. Suddenly, the mass of boggart workers shivered and moved to make room for 2 tall warriors. The bigger boggats had spears held out in front of them as they emerged from the tunnel. Black Nail grimaced. This development wasn't a surprise, but it was still annoying. The plan would still work. Remaining behind a rank of its own smaller brethren, who served as shields for him, one of the warriors lashed out at Black Nail with his spear. The hobgoblin was forced to duck under the blow and then kick away a worker that tried to attack him at the same time. He hated when boggats did this. Meanwhile, the second warrior used his spear to attack a hobgoblin to Black Nail's right. The hob tried to block the attack, but it still grazed his shoulder, and he was forced back. This opened a hole in the hobgoblin line, allowing the workers to surge forward. That's far enough, you tiny black beetles, Black Nail roared in response. He knew he needed to do something now. His minions were in serious danger of being overwhelmed. So, as the hobgoblin chieftain snarled at his foes, he reached into his core and pulled out as much mana as possible. He then shaped the power into a wave and hurled it at the boggats before him. The magical power hit the creatures and soaked into their minds, bringing cold terror and mind-numbing fear with it. The boggart horde rippled and faltered. I'm going to rip you apart. Black Nail screamed as he began striking at the mass of enemies before him. The power of Black Nail's magic-infused blows sent mangled boggats flying, and as he yelled, he assaulted the boggats with another wave of magical terror that attacked their minds. This was too much for many of the stocky workers. Their attack stopped as the swarm fell into chaos. Many of them began desperately trying to flee out of the range of Black Nail's long sword. As the enemy broke before him, Black Nail grinned madly and pressed his own attack. He kicked one of the last workers directly in front of him out of the way, and then he slashed at the warrior with the spear who'd attacked him before. The warrior blocked the blow, but Black Nail didn't care. Growling hungrily, he used a burst of strength to push the warrior off balance and then punched it in the face. There was a crunching sound as Black Nail's fist impacted the carapace, and the boggart spasmed. Thankfully, the carapace on the creature's face wasn't very thick, although the strike had still hurt Black Nail's hand more than a little. The pain was a minor concern though, and it was barely noticeable through the excitement of battle. Taking advantage of his foe's stunned state, Black Nail quickly raised his blade and decapitated the boggart with one swift strike. At the same time, the other hobgoblins rallied and trampled over the workers in their way as they threw themselves at the second warrior. One hobgoblin went down with a spear wound to his arm, but then the warrior was overwhelmed by a flurry of blows from the other hobs. As the last warrior went down, the workers broke completely. The last few that were still trying to fight turned and fled. Soon, the entire mass of boggats was fighting itself as all the workers attempted to push their way back into the tunnel all at once. This gave the hobgoblins plenty of opportunity to attack their backs, and dozens of workers were quickly hacked apart. By the time the last living boggart had managed to escape, the floor of the basement was littered with boggart corpses and bits of shattered black carapace. It was a rather satisfying sight. With his bloodlust slowly fading, Black Nail looked around and then eyed the tunnel. It didn't seem like there was going to be another attack, and he had no desire to chase the boggats underground into unfamiliar caves. Let's get out of here, Black Nail told his minions as he turned and began walking to the stairs. He wanted to see what was going on above. None of his minions objected to that plan, so they all hurried after Blacknail as he exited the decrepit and ruined workshop. The streets outside were much the same as the last time Blacknail had seen them, although there were a few more humans in red around. They were all keeping their distance from the workshop though, which made sense considering the danger the plague posed to them. Blacknail sheathed his weapon and began walking over toward Kita's position. "Oh, you're back? Are you done this time? I'm tired of sitting out here, doing nothing," Kita said as he approached. The 3 guards in red beside her were silent. They still seemed nervous. Blacknail gave the redhead a look. "Then you should have come with me into the building or not come with me to Dagger Point at all." Kita just huffed indignantly, as if Blacknail hadn't told her the simple truth. Suddenly, Blacknail felt someone tug his shoulder and yell in his ear. "Get down." Surprised, he let himself be dragged down toward the ground by Hera. This probably wasn't a weird assassination attempt by her. If she was going to kill him like this, she would have done it right after the meeting with Hera. Around him, several other hobgoblins all ducked at the same time. This turned out to be the right thing to do, as a blast of swirling energy flew over Blacknail's head a moment later and then smashed into a building behind him. There was a deafening boom as the magic exploded and then clattering noise as broken stone and brick rained down around the hobgoblins. Shocked, Blacknail glanced toward the source of the attack, and saw a boggart warrior wielding a glowing staff. It was standing in the entrance to another abandoned building. However, as he watched, it stepped aside, and boggart workers began streaming out of the building. "Stupid Kita," Blacknail hissed as he climbed back to his feet. If he'd been hit, it would have been all her fault since she'd been distracting him with her stupidity. Normally, he would have sensed the attack or something. Unsurprisingly, everyone else was just standing around with stupid looks on their faces and no one seemed to be doing anything about the mob of boggarts that was swiftly building in size, so Blacknail had to. Typical. "Form up on me. Anyone who misses this fight will be beaten like a drum," Blacknail yelled as he drew his sword and flourished it up above his head. There were still groups of hobgoblins scattered around the street, and he wanted them at his back. Hobgoblins quickly began hustling over from various buildings and alleys, but Blacknail knew that many wouldn't make it in time. From a ramshackle hut over to Blacknail's left, another wave of boggarts suddenly emerged. These new attackers charged right toward Blacknail and reached him within seconds. A melee quickly broke out as the hobgoblins and humans defended themselves. Soon, the streets were full of chaotic fighting between scattered groups. Blacknail slashed at several boggart workers that tried to swarm him, but he was forced to jump back as another blast of force zoomed by. The magical attack hit a hobgoblin and a worker that were fighting beside him, sending them both flying. Ouch! Hissing in frustration, Blacknail eyed the enemy mage. He had been keeping an eye on him, but now he knew the creature needed to be dealt with right away. Blacknail couldn't fight effectively if he had to worry about incoming magical attacks, and the boggarts could probably afford to keep trading workers for hobgoblins. It seemed like the boggarts had everyone else outnumbered. Leaving his allies behind, Blacknail immediately broke out into a run as he charged across the street toward the mage. Boggarts moved to intercept him, but he dodged them or kicked them aside with ease. The mage itself tracked Blacknail with the tip of his glowing staff. Apparently, he knew who the greatest threat was. As a blast of rippling power shot toward him, Blacknail threw himself sideways. He managed to dodge the attack by inches, but the swirling air around the blast knocked him off balance. He staggered for a moment, before recovering and resuming his charge. A mass of a dozen boggarts formed a line in front of Blacknail, but he didn't slow. Instead, Blacknail threw a wave of terror-inducing mana at them, cut 2 down, and then pushed straight through the rest. Now, there was nothing between him and the mage. Caught off guard, the boggart spellcaster hurriedly tried to shoot another force blast at Blacknail, but the hobgoblin was quicker. He grabbed a nearby boggart and tossed it at the mage. The creature squealed as it flew through the air. This surprised the mage, throwing his aim off. His magical blast hit the worker, sending it flying, and then zipped harmlessly past Blacknail. Sensing sweet victory, Blacknail grinned as he lunged forward and slashed at the mage with a fierce 2-handed swing. His blade came down on his opponent's staff, knocking it aside. A swift follow-up slash then planted Blacknail's blade in the boggart's torso. It spasmed and made a gurgling sound as the hobgoblin pulled his blade free, and then it flopped over. The fight was far from over though. Turning around, Blacknail saw that his minions and the local guards were still fighting a lot of boggart workers. Several tall black warriors had also appeared from somewhere. Growling angrily, Blacknail headed back to help his minions and Kita. He wasn't too worried about himself, but there were so many enemies that he was probably going to lose a lot of minions before the battle was over. He really hadn't expected the boggarts to be here in such force. They were supposed to relying on the plague to destroy the city. Over to Blacknail's right, a group of a dozen workers ran out of a building. They were headed right for Hera, so Blacknail quickly intercepted them. Charging among them, he hacked and slashed at the black figures until they were forced to stop and deal with him. One jumped at Blacknail, but he reached out and caught it in midair, dashed it against the ground, and then stomped on it for good measure. A quick blast of magical fear then sent the survivors of the group skittering back into the shadows. With the nearby boggarts all fleeing, Blacknail had a clear path to rejoin his minions. They were struggling against a mob of boggarts that outnumbered them 2 to 1, including a single warrior. That didn't last though. Blacknail hit the back of the boggarts like a charging boar. He screamed as he launched a savage horizontal slash at the warrior's back. His blade cut down, smashing through carapace and parting the flesh beneath it. The force of the blow knocked the creature over, and the blade continued on, hitting a boggart worker. Pulling his sword back up, Black Nail stepped over the fallen bandits and rejoined his allies. His presence quickly turned the fight against the bandits, and more of them began to fall. There was no shortage of reinforcements for the swarm of black creatures though. Other groups of guardsmen in red went down under mobs of vicious black bandits, and more were still emerging from the shadows to join the fight. Slowly, the black tide began to push Black Nail and his allies back. A hobgoblin to Black Nail's left fell as a bandit landed on his back. Reacting quickly, Bulk Nail stabbed the creature in the side and tossed its twitching carcass away. He then kicked another worker that tried to gore the fallen hobgoblin, which gave him time to reach down and pull the hobgoblin back to safety, where he could recover. As the fight continued, Black Nail found himself having to focus more and more on protecting his minions as they grew tired from the bandits' endless assault. This couldn't last. Soon, they would be overwhelmed, but there was little Black Nail could do but keep fighting. He didn't have nearly enough mana to use fear magic constantly. His core already felt low on power. Beside Black Nail, Hera suddenly slipped on some wet bandit blood. As she fell, he caught her and used his arm to block a bandit that tried to bite her face. Hera's face was one of Black Nail's favorite parts of her, so he didn't want it damaged. The bandit's fangs pierced Black Nail's thick leather jacket, but only barely. Growling in anger and pain, Black Nail swung the creature around and used it to smack another bandit out of the air. Hera then put a dagger in the bandit's eye and it came loose. That was when a new swarm of bandits appeared and charged toward the hobgoblin's flank. Black Nail grimaced in frustration. He couldn't be everywhere. This was going to hurt his minions a lot. In fact, it might be time to consider grabbing his most useful minions and retreating before he got encircled. Black Nail's cynical thoughts were interrupted by a fresh bout of yelling from down the street. The voices sounded both very human and quite angry. It also sounded like there were more than few of them. Glancing over that way, Black Nail saw a wave of heavily armed humans charge down the street and slam into the bandits. Most of the men were wearing the red uniforms of the governor's men, but there were more than a few men who looked like generic ruffians and bandits mixed among them. The massed line of heavily armed humans hit the smaller bandits hard and immediately began pushing them back and trampling them. The gathered mobs of bandits that filled the streets hesitated under this new assault. Their own attacks faltered as they tried to adjust and figure out what was happening. Black Nail took advantage of this pause to lunge forward and began cutting down every bandit within striking distance. Half a dozen fell within a few moments, but then the swarm finally reacted. As one, all the bandits suddenly turned to flee. They scuttled away into the shadows, leaving their backs exposed, but Black Nail let them go. His own troops were exhausted, and in no shape to give chase. Several collapsed the moment it looked like the fighting was over. The human force that had just arrived spilled past Black Nail and moved to seize control of the streets. Black Nail eyed them warily and had his minions back up against an alley so that they had an escape route, but they weren't attacked. Black Nail had thought that unlikely, but it was better to be safe when unpredictable humans were involved. Soon, the governor and Luphira appeared, and a squad of men escorted them over to Black Nail. Interestingly enough, they both had their own guards. The governor was surrounded by his soldiers in red, while Luphira was protected by several large men in black, who resembled the other human fighters who joined the battle. It seemed like Luphira had brought her own troops. What's the situation here? I've ordered my men to stay away from all the buildings, lest they be exposed to the plague, the governor said as he met up with Black Nail, who was hard to miss thanks to his height and horns. I was right. There are ghouls and bandits here, Black Nail bragged. I just saved your city. The governor frowned and looked down at one of the nearby bandit worker corpses, of which there was no shortage of. So, I see. We did just rescue you in turn, Luphira pointed out, which earned her a nasty glare from Hera. Without me and my hobs you'll all get the plague and die, Black Nail huffed in reply. He'd been paying close attention to Luphira, her face, not her other more distracting parts, like her huge breasts, and he was certain he knew why she was being so difficult. It was an act. Luphira sighed overdramatically and nodded. That does seem to be true, so let's get down to business, shall we? We all have a lot to do if we want to save the city. Yes, please tell us exactly what happened here. This situation needs contained, the governor added as he followed Luphira's lead. As the man was talking, Black Nail saw Luphira turn and give him a wink. Yes, she was definitely playing a game here. She'd also noticed that he'd noticed, or something. Black Nail felt a headache coming on. Human social interactions could be far too complex. Honestly, he wanted to stab someone, because that would simplify everything in a way hobgoblins naturally understood. There was also nothing like the iron scent of blood to clear the mind. Turning away from Luphira, Black Nail quickly explained the situation to the governor. Well, it does seem like we will require your services if we are to face this new threat, the governor admitted after Black Nail had finished speaking. Without a doubt, Luphira agreed solemnly. She then turned to give Black Nail a subtle grin. It seems like Dagger Point is going to be undergoing some changes. The governor turned to her, and her poker face instantly reappeared. So, you will support me if I attempt to uphold the new laws required for our treaty with Black Nail to work? Luphira nodded. I will, and I'm sure I can convince some of the chiefs to go along. Black Nail watched Luphira out of the corner of his eye. It seemed like she wanted Black Nail's forces in the city for some reason, and she didn't want the governor to know that. Well, he was just glad she was his ally, probably. Had her hostile behavior toward Hera also been some sort of manipulation? Ugh, he had no idea. This was why he avoided Luphira, or one of the reasons anyway. The governor sighed. Then, I suppose we shall soon see what fate the gods have in store for us in these dark times. I have a large force of hobgoblins arriving soon, Black Nail told the humans. They should be able to hunt down any ghouls that the boggats create and fight off any more boggart attacks as long as you support them. They will need food and probably some money too. This alliance is sounding more and more like an occupation, the governor muttered to himself. I'm sure we can afford to pay these forces a basic amount for their services, Luphira reassured the man. I'm sure they won't demand much. What about you? Luphira asked Black Nail. How long will you be staying? Not long. I'm very important and I'm needed elsewhere, he answered. Oh, then who will be leading the troops you leave behind? One of my smartest hobgoblins, and he will have several human helpers. Luphira grinned eagerly. I can't wait to meet them. Black Nail frowned. Interlude, where it all began. The ruins stretched on as far as the eye could see. A once mighty city that had been brought low some time ago. Broken buildings lay alongside shattered streets and fallen towers. Plants and bushes grew wild and thick among the ruins. Bits of snow still also clung to ground in the shadows, although most it had long since melted in the sunlight. The air here was heavy and cold though, eerily so. It was also silent. There was no twittering birdsong or other animal sounds. There was no hint of human activity either. Although some buildings looked intact, there was no laughter or clatter of industry. All was unnaturally silent. Then, a sound like a mighty wind echoing through a canyon reverberated through the ruins, blowing swirls of dust and rustling the leaves of the scraggly trees growing through the stone, as it bellowed out from the remains of a fort-like building near the center of the city. There, a huge gaping hole had been torn through one of its thick stone walls that was large enough for an ogre to walk through. Only a little light from the dim sun up in the sky managed to find its way inside the building, so it was dark and shadowy within. However, as another rasping breath echoed out, there was movement from inside as something massive stirred. A single eye flickered open in the darkness. The size of a human head, it glowed as it reflected the remnants of light from outside. Lethargically, the slitted pupil at the center of the eye swerved to take in its surroundings as if the creature it belonged to had just woken from a long sleep. Rubble began to shift and clatter as the beast rose to its feet, and there was a flash of gray scales as they caught the light. The massive drake growled loudly enough for the air to tremble as it stepped outside into the ruins of the once grand city. Rows of jagged crystals ran down its back, marking it as a child of magic and something far more than most of its lesser kin. As the humongous beast surveyed its devastated domain, its belly rumbled like a storm that was about to break. Feeling the pain of hunger, it hissed in annoyance and unleashed a small burst of magic. Immediately, the crystals on its back glowed faintly and a wave of cold washed forth. The air crackled as all the moisture in it froze and white frost crept across all the nearby weathered stone. Its frustration vented, the great beast began to walk down the street in search of the sustenance it craved. The world watched in terrified silence. For the greatest enemy of man, the true tyrant of the north, the doom of Coriolis had awoken and it was time for him to hunt.